you found the skeleton, how would you tell it represents you personally? How would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
All right, hey everybody, welcome to this Just Chattin'. Jackson Wheat, as a result of a little bit of a miscommunication between the three of us, will be a little bit late. So, I took what he had said to mean that he was okay starting basically at 5:30 or just after his time. And what he meant is that he was getting out of work at 5:30 or around that time, and so he would, have to get to work. But when he gets here, assuming he does, he will be in the top right. I'm Dapper Dinosaur, up in the top left. You're on my channel, so you probably know who I am. This is Jeremy Spry, down in the bottom left, right below my video. So, yeah. Jeremy, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. It's a nice day out. I got some outside time. I played some fetch with one of the dogs here. I've been playing some Kerbal Space Program 2, which just came out. So, been pretty good. And so you and I ended up talking to each other in a Facebook group, because one of the only things that the Dapper Dinosaur Facebook page does is engage in a few, science and creationism related Facebook pages. So, and basically, I asked if you wanted to be on the channel for, just a chat about, what you believe about things like, the history of the world and things like that. And how it differs from me and why we both think the different things that we do and whether or not we could come to an understanding about each other and things like that. And also that I might bring in Jackson Wheat, who is my usual partner for things like this. And of course, you agreed, which I have to say props to you, because the vast majority of people who I ask to do this just say no or just don't respond at all. So thank you very much for being here. So why don't you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about who you are, why you're interested in this, and also if you could state more or less like a concise version of what you see as the history of the world and your ideas about whether or not there's common ancestry, how far back it goes, whether or not evolutionary mechanisms are actually explaining biodiversity, that kind of stuff.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. I was exposed to Jackson Wheat before being exposed to you, and man, he just impressed me. He was one of the most intimidating people to talk to me, because I felt like he just really knew what he was talking about, more so than other atheist YouTubers or communicators that I was introduced to. And then now I've heard some of your stuff. So, man, what an honor to talk with you guys. I imagine I'm going to learn a lot tonight, and I'm looking forward to that. And thank you for letting me share my views and all that.
Oh, look, we're always happy to have genial conversations with creationists. It's one of our favorite things to do as a team. And look, we're just a couple of guys who like to hang out on the internet and talk about nerdy stuff. So don't feel too intimidated, right?
Well, thank you. Well, it's good to be here.
Yeah,
I was raised a Christian. My dad was a pastor for a while. He's actually a pastor before I knew what was going on. I'm the fourth of 4 children, so he quit before that pastoring and went into sales. And so
there's much better money in sales generally.
Right? Yeah, a lot less stress sometimes than pastoring. But I grew up in a Christian home, and then whenever I was 17, I gave my life to Christ. And after that, I just had a desire to teach the Bible. And so I started making YouTube videos teaching the Bible. And I was actually going through it. Going through the 1-year Bible was kind of how I was teaching, but really slowly. So I remember there was this video I made, and I was pretty much asking Christians, are you acting like an atheist? Are you acting like you don't believe in God? And because I made that video with that title, a lot of atheists started commenting on it. And that's actually how this started. Is then I got in these conversations with people. And at that time, I didn't know a lot. So to me, I think I even heard it from, what's the guy with the banana? The atheist joke about him and his banana analogy. You guys
the atheist's worst nightmare, where Ray Comfort says that the banana is so perfectly designed for the the human hand.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I haven't even seen that. I assume it's a bad argument because so many people criticized it.
Well, here's
But
the big reason it's particularly bad. The banana that Ray is using was in fact designed for humans to consume, but by humans breeding wild banana plants into the domesticated banana plants. So humans used evolutionary mechanisms to create a banana designed for themselves, whereas he's trying to use it as like an example of miraculous design by God, which kind of falls apart. And if you look at the wild banana, which I guess you could try to make the argument as a design by God, it's significantly worse for consumption. It's full of seeds, it's tiny, there's very little meat in it, kind of gross.
Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen pictures of it. And I even heard like when you eat banana flavored candy, it's the original banana.
Well, it's the
true.
I believe it's the Marie Gros banana as opposed to the Cavendish, which is what we use now for bananas. Which I think there were cultivars before the Marie Gros became popular, but yeah, it is now largely extinct. I hear every once in a while rumors that there's like one or two plants left in like greenhouses here and there around the world, and I'm like, maybe, I don't know. Sounds like a rumor to me. But
so he had something. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, so I was just gonna say. So, if you wanted to continue about Ray Comfort, go ahead. I thought you were no,
okay.
That's fine.
Yeah, so he said something, to the effect of, in another video, information's only been shown to come from a mind. DNA is information, and so I had that to go on whenever I was talking to people, and so I was just really trying to get to the bottom of, atheists recognizing design, and so very, very, basic argument that I had, but that started me diving into science more, and I was just like, what is really happening inside living cells? Because I thought, if atheism is true, if there is no creator, then I should be, or if there is a creator, both sides of the story, then I should be able to tell by looking inside, what's going on inside a living cell. Is there evidence for a creator or not? So that's the route I took, and I was blown away. I graduated high school in 2003. I did 1 year of college. So there was a lot that happened, I want to say around 2008, with Drew Barry. I don't know if you're familiar with him, and he takes he makes these scientifically accurate animations of what's happening inside living cells. So I found those, and I just really started to study what was happening. And so I made a little series called Life Kills Atheism, and I did one video on DNA replication. No, actually just DNA, and then DNA replication, how I thought that could only come about by a creator, and then transcription, translation. I was doing some debates here and there, so I was on Steve McRae's podcast or YouTube channel a couple times, and he introduced me to protein chaperones, which blew me away. So that, and then ATP synthase and binary fission. I think that was the 7 things. Okay. And so that's really where it started. And then I started my Facebook page and my YouTube channel, Atheism versus Logic. I don't have a lot of followers, and I'm okay with that. And I'm not really consistent a lot in posting, but I do like to get in the online arguments. I think debating is very healthy. It's healthy for a society, and so I'm glad you think that way too. I mean, as long as it's polite.
Generally, yes. There are some things I don't think it's worth debating. Like, I don't think it's worth debating things like, oh, I think we should do a genocide. No, I'm not going to debate that. We just shouldn't. I don't need to debate it.
Great example.
But with a few exceptions like that, yeah, I do think that generally speaking, a good healthy debate is a good thing. Also, I just want to say, Too Young to Feel This Old has gifted 5 Dapper Dinosaur memberships to the channel. They went to Ian Debunked, Dragon Spartan 90, Robert Adsit, Snorfoot, and Vesta Freya. So if you guys are members in the chat, please send in some tetrapod emojis to welcome those 5 people to the memberships. So I have a few questions that I want to get at what your positions are.
Okay.
So what do you think of common ancestry of organisms? Do you think that all humans share common ancestry?
All humans to one original or 2 humans?
Well, let's just say this. Could you trace, let's say you had perfect knowledge of genealogy for every human. Could you trace any two people back to a common ancestor that those two share, and do that.
Yeah, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe. Yeah, I believe in Adam and Eve. I am a young Earth creationist, so that was my next points were.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
about.
let's talk about that. How old do you think the Earth is?
Yeah.
What level of like
Yeah.
common ancestry do you think is warranted to accept things like that?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So after studying pretty much abiogenesis, then I studied a little bit more about the uh, evolution. The hypothesis that a prokaryotic cell evolved into, or archaea evolved into a eukaryotic cell. Um, but then, yeah, let me go to. I'm a young Earth creationist. There's some things that I say because I think I can prove them with evidence. Like for me, it is made up that abiogenesis um, without a creator is not possible, and I can prove that with syllogisms. When I say I'm a young Earth creationist, I cannot prove that, right? So I realize, so I'm just admitting there are things that I take on faith, but I think it's reasonable faith, and I'll tell you why. Um, I believe the Bible, so I've gosh, how do I summarize that? So, I think there's things that God told Israel, some like how to deal with germs, even though germs weren't discovered, I think, until the mid 1800s. To me, that gives some validity. Something that you're probably very subjective. Jesus said that my sheep hear my voice. So I've read the whole Bible. I've commented on a lot of it. So I believe the Bible. I know that's probably frustrating for some people, but I am a young Earth creationist. I'm lactose intolerant, and the reason why I say that is because I had to buy lactase pills, which are enzymes, and so from a
That they
pretty
are.
early age, I realized that, or I got the impression that enzymes are fragile because it says you can't put it on hot food, stuff like that. And so, now when I hear about them finding soft dinosaur tissue and stuff like that, to me, I take that as evidence. I don't believe. I'm very skeptical to the idea that dinosaurs are tens of millions of years old. And then probably a lot of other young Earth creationism talking points about the decay rate of the Earth's magnetic field.
Okay.
What intersolar comets, I believe, is one other thing. Like if there's comets inside our solar system, they should be losing mass every time they get so close to the sun, and there shouldn't be any. The sodium rate in the sea, stuff like that, or the amount of sodium in the sea
Okay.
should be higher. But so yeah, so really, what I'm saying is abiogenesis. I believe, I hit that hard. I believe I can prove that with syllogisms. That
So first there's a couple things. One is we had a question come in, and I do think
okay.
it's an interesting question, and so I'll ask it. Vishanti asks in a super chat for $5. He teaches the Bible. Well, I'll turn it into a second person question. Sorry. You teach the Bible. Do you read or speak Hebrew or Greek?
No, I love like BibleHub.com. I can look up, which I don't. Well, yeah, I don't speak Hebrew or Greek or Aramaic. So
Oh, Aramaic.
uh, so I I just look up on Bible Hub like the Hebrew. If it's the Old Testament, I'll say like the Hebrew translation, and it usually spells it out pretty well. And you can look at the original word and what it means and stuff like that. So I do think that's important to try to get to that. I do prefer the ESV and the NASB because they are more of a word for words translation instead of a thought for thought.
Yeah, they do tend to lean a little bit more onto the literalist translation side, which has its pros and cons. Look, there's always different philosophies about translation, and I can't say that one of them is the right philosophy to have about translation of ancient texts. There are pros and cons to each approach to translation, which is why I think it's important to read. If you can't read the original languages, I think it's important to try to get translations that do more of a thought for thought versus a word for word, and then also get the word for word and try to compare and understand how like different idioms are coming across and things like that. But
Right.
so okay, I have a question about your positions or the possibility of them shifting, which is to say, you feel like you could demonstrate fairly conclusively that abiogenesis couldn't happen. Okay.
Correct.
But also you would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, But given that you're a young Earth creationist, sorry, you would also say things like that. They wolves and tigers don't share common ancestry.
Yeah, that would be, again, that's more based on faith, and that, yeah, I don't even know what you'd call it, a feline and a canine.
Okay.
And yeah.
What about?
So to me,
Sorry, go ahead.
but again, that's more of a faith thing. Like,
Well, that's part of
because
the
I believe,
question I'm going to lead into. So I have a couple
yeah,
follow-up there. One is, what about
okay,
say a human and a chimpanzee or a bonobo?
yeah, I'd say no.
Okay.
And I'd be tempted. It's hard to think outside of this Christian worldview I have. It's hard to say what would I think if I were not a Christian, because to me, consciousness is something amazing. Um, yeah. So we've and that's no, I really haven't studied that much about the cognitive abilities of, what did you say?
I said
Kind of
chimpanzees and
apes,
bonobos versus
chimpanzee.
humans.
Yeah. So I haven't studied much, but if I was not a Christian, I would study more on, what are their cognitive abilities? Is that possible? We've also got, which, gosh, I need to look at that scientific paper about um, the amount of mutations that they think is. And I think even Jackson did a video on this, trying to combat. Long story short, I know on whale evolution, Jackson and Long Story Short went back and forth on some videos.
I remember that.
Um,
Actually, I rewatched
yeah,
those
but
not
I
that
would
long ago.
yeah, so trying to think outside of my Christian worldview, I would be concerned that the gene differences, that there's not enough time in the time scale that we have, or the secular time scale,
Hmm.
for that change to happen. And then you've just got the question that can become more philosophical of what is consciousness.
Yeah.
So is that something that could emerge from just materialism?
So, I guess my follow-up question there would be, it, what if you were presented with strong evidence for common ancestry that you would not otherwise accept given young Earth creationism? Would that make you question the young Earth part? Because on the one hand, there's a position where you say, I don't think abiogenesis could happen naturalistically. However, and this is more or less the position of places like Biologos, right? Where they'll say, so the evidence for the evolution of at least like eukaryotes as a group sharing common ancestry is overwhelming to the point where at least the physical form that humans have now arrived via evolution, via essentially standard mechanisms. And, we can have some idea about souls and how that fits into consciousness or whatever. I'm not
Yeah.
a philosopher of consciousness or a neurologist or any of the things that would be terribly important for that discussion. But would that be a position that you would find to be tenable within your wider framework?
If I were not a young Earth creationist, is that what you said?
Well, I mean, if it could be reasonably demonstrated that things like the common ancestry of, say, eukaryotes, or even just common ancestry that you would not otherwise accept, like between humans and chimpanzees or humans and gorillas.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. So, I mean, yeah, I like to think that, I'll follow the knowledge, the evidence where I think it's leading. I do not think ignorance is bliss. So yeah, if I was given enough evidence, and there's that famous debate between Ken Ham and Bill Nye, and I didn't watch it, but I think I've watched parts of it. But there was that famous part where Bill Nye pretty much asked him if he would change his mind. I think it was based on evidence, and he
mhm.
said, Ken Ham said no, and I disagree. I think the Bible's very clear, that the Bible says that my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. So the Bible's pro knowledge. When it talks about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, I think it's talking about experiencing good and evil. God was trying to keep them from experiencing good and evil, not just book knowledge.
Okay.
So yeah, I think we should change our mind, and I'm willing to. If I find out young Earth creationism is not true, I'm willing to leave it. If I find out, evidence against God, or that Jesus is God, I'm okay with it. And I've got 4 daughters, so if there is no afterlife, then I should make different decisions to really make great use of this short life, if that's all that there is. So I've got incentive for following the truth, because I could, if I stay in this Christian worldview and it's false, my daughters could be missionaries, and then I've missed out on a lot of time with them that was unnecessary. So yeah, I think I'm willing to follow the evidence where it leads. But what I've seen is, you know, I just keep seeing more confirmation. I keep seeing more confirmation of young Earth creationism in my mind from what's continual soft dinosaur tissue found. I think they even found like retina fluid from a mosasaur. I'll
I'm
have
not
to
aware
look
of that
that up.
report, but maybe.
Okay.
So there's a quick question for $5 from Van Valley 1998 who asks, so personal question, why do you not think God could have used evolution to spread life over Earth?
Yeah, so there's this, the scientific reason would be, if you look at the differences between prokaryotic cell or bacteria and a eukaryotic cell, the thing that really hit me were the motor proteins and microtubules. So I recommend you look that up, look up animations from good old Drew Barry that I mentioned earlier, which he believes in Darwinian evolution, but I love his animation. So inside eukaryotic cells, there's these amazing microtubules that are these tracks that come together and then they break apart, and then there's the motor proteins walk on them, carry cargo, do different things. And to me, that's something that's clearly engineered. Carl Sagan said extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Going back, he'd probably say we just need normal evidence, not even extraordinary. So to me, that's an extraordinary claim that motor proteins and microtubules emerged from just, sorry, that's my parents' phone.
No worries.
The extraordinary claim to me is that motor proteins and microtubules emerged from random mutation in time. Would you say that's the consensus, that it did emerge from?
I mean, you also need to add in things like selection.
Yeah, and natural selection. Sorry.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
So selection is an important part, because selection is the non-random aspect here.
Yeah, but natural selection is not it doesn't have the creative power. It just has the power to choose.
Right, that's the mutation part.
Right. So I'm saying, to me, that shows clear signs of engineering and not random.
Okay.
And the random would have to create it in order to be naturally selected. And of course, I know it's bit by bit, not all at once, but I still I need evidence that it could happen bit by bit. So, I've been doing this for years now, and I welcome people to send me scientific papers. And so when I read scientific papers on the hypotheses about the emergence of it, I'm just like, I don't think that's convincing. That's not following the scientific method. It's just, it's a lot of wishful thinking, and what ifs, this could have happened or this could have happened. Like, I need to see it to believe.
Let's drill down. What is it about motor proteins or microtubules that makes it so that you don't think that they could come about via the standard mechanisms of evolution? What is it about them? Is it?
Yeah, so if you look up, first microtubules, if you look up an animation of them, there are these tubes that come together in the cell as tracks for the motor proteins to walk on.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got, number one, you've got that. Now that serves a purpose. It's not, well, let me just back up to what is intent and not intent. If I throw a deck of cards in the air and they fall on the ground, that is, complex. That's the word. That's very complex arrangement. It was random. All right. If I build a 3-story house of cards, that's less complex because I'm not even going to use the whole deck. But it has clear signs of intent. So when I look at a microtubule in a eukaryotic cell, I'm like, man, that has intent. When I see a motor protein walking on that, carrying cargo, I'm like, that has intent. That's serving a purpose. It's not like throwing a deck of cards and it's random. Right? I'm not arguing for complexity, and I think atheists attack that a lot. I'm arguing for intent. And so when I see the relationship and the system of motor proteins and microtubules, I see clear intent that, to me, I can't believe that was done by random mutation and natural selection unless I'm shown. I'm willing to change my mind if somebody follows the scientific method, which is hard because they say that happens over who knows how many years just for that.
Okay, so how would you tell the difference between a structure which had evolved and served some function versus one that had been designed specifically to do a function? How would you tell the difference? So because otherwise,
go ahead. Sorry.
Just saying it has intent. I don't know how you infer intent from the existence of a collection of molecules without some additional thing. Because right now, I don't see a reason. All I hear is the word intent, but it doesn't tell me much. Also, I'm going to go ahead and say that, guys, we're going to hold questions. Feel free to super chat questions in. We will definitely get to them. But I'm going to hold off questions for a little while until we get to a Q&A section, which I'm going to do towards the end of this. During that Q&A section, any super chatted questions will be at the top of the list. And then any questions that come in after the Q&A starts, I'll go through in the order that they come in. Unless, of course, during that you super chat, in which case, again, you'll jump to the front of that super chat line. And I just do that because I don't want to interrupt all of the flow of the discussion, because we have had some great questions come in from Vishanti, from Neslig, earlier from Medallion 1998, and I don't want to discourage that because there really are some good questions. But I also don't want to have the conversation always go back and forth between the super chats and what we're saying. And I'm hoping that Jackson Wheat, who again we had a miscommunication with, will be here soon. But I do want to apologize to everyone who was expecting Jackson Wheat. I should have asked more questions for clarification from what he said, and instead I just assumed that I knew what he meant, and I didn't, and that's on me. So getting back to the whole intent thing, because so are you familiar with genetic algorithms?
Genetic algorithms. Now, is that similar to the video you sent me where the guy did like 5,000 base pairs and then he looked for start and stops, stuff like that?
There are some similarities, but this is actually a technique in computing. So what happens is, now this is not a technique that's always used. Like a lot of times, there are already well-known solutions to the problems that you can solve with this. So you just implement those, but you can still do it. And so one of the examples is sometimes people will do things like create an AI that can play a video game via genetic algorithm. So what they'll do is they'll have a random number of input, cross-linking, and then like output neurons, which can map to inputs from whatever system this AI is existing in, and the output can. And in the case of like a video game, right, the outputs correspond to control inputs to the game, so that the AI can use it. And then essentially they just have random links between all of the neurons. It's completely random. And then what they do is they have some kind of criterion or weighted set of criteria based on, did you play the game well? Did you win at the game? Did you get, if it's a racing game, did you get far down the track? Things like that. And then what they'll do is they'll just say, okay, I now have 5,000 random assortments of these neurons. And we'll see which ones just happen to do best. Because, if you have 5,000 random assortments of neural networks, some of them are going to do a little bit better. And then you take those and you say, okay, we're going to take those best ones, and then we're going to mutate back to having, like, say, 5,000 again. And every amount of mutation is complete. All the mutations are random. And so a certain percentage of the neural links are randomly changed. And then you start it again. And you pick the best of those. And you keep doing that. And eventually, you can actually get an AI that can play whatever video game you're working on. So no one designed that neural net. It was specifically randomized. Now, of course, there were some design elements and things like, the input, what inputs are allowed and what outputs are allowed. But those are things that come prior to the genetic part. So we can think of those as analogous to the pre-existing physical world that evolution would have to function in. And if you want to say that the physical world was designed by God, I don't really care to argue against that. I'm perfectly happy to say, okay, fine. So, but within that context, you are watching randomness create the ability to do a very specified task. Watching randomness, coupled with selection over time, create the ability to do things like complete a race, or win in a virtual tennis match, or something like that, right? So, because of that, it doesn't seem like just the fact that the microtubules are completing some purpose that you can identify for the cells, that therefore they had to be designed. So what is it about them that makes you think they're designed, given that we know that even outside of biological life, we can get purposeful, well, seemingly purposeful action out of randomness once you couple it with selection?
Yeah, I would say because if you take this out, will the system fall apart? For instance, in your analogy, there was intelligent selection, right?
By whom?
Whoever was working with the random.
No, they set fitness criteria, but they did not make the
Right.
choices. Which sets
The fitness
of
criteria were, but correct me if I'm wrong, the fitness criteria were intelligently put in place, right?
well, sure, but again, that's part of the already existing background in which we have randomness. Because look, we can't say that in the world, right, we don't have fitness criteria. Obviously, if say a squid dies before it can go lay eggs, well, it's not going to reproduce. It failed at whatever fitness selection. Now, whether that fitness selection was imposed by an intelligent agent or not doesn't really matter to the genetics of that squid. So it doesn't really matter if you went out and found the squid or if someone else did. Now, hold on. We have to say hello to Jackson Wheat. Jackson is here, and we need to rearrange my inputs a little bit. Jackson is currently muted. I'm hoping he comes off of mute relatively soon. So while I'm rearranging that, plus another part of that is like, this is something that I find a little frustrating a lot of times when I talk about evolution with creationists. And it's that sometimes creationists will say things like, well, okay, you can't really study evolution in a lab, which first is simply not true. You absolutely can. There are many, many laboratory experiments in evolution, but that's not the most important part. The part that really gets me is that it's a little bit of a damned if you do, damned if you don't. Because you say, oh, you can't study this stuff in a lab. And I say, well, what about this laboratory experiment? And I'm saying that this computing thing is analogous to a laboratory experiment, right? It's essentially a laboratory simulation. And then they'll say, oh, well, you had to have an intelligent person set that up. Well, okay, which one is it? We can't study it in a lab, or laboratory studies don't count. Because those are inconsistent criteria. But first, let's say, welcome to Jackson Wheat. Now that I have him placed where he should be in the setup here. Jackson? Oh, wait. Nope, he's gone. Uh-oh. I'm hoping that he'll be back soon, so I'm not going to reset up all of the views of everything. So, oh.
There he is.
Jackson, you're back. You're muted, though. I think Jackson might be having some technical difficulties. That's okay.
Got it.
Oh, there you are. Jackson, how are you? Sorry about all this.
Loading. Okay, it's fine.
So, Jackson, can you hear us?
Yep.
Awesome. So, I was just trying to ask why it is that randomness coupled with selection can work in computer simulations, and the response was that, well, that was set up by an intelligent agent. And I'm saying that I don't think that that's a valid criterion, because that's how all laboratory experiments are, right? Like, if you take, let's say you have a laboratory experiment in chemistry, right? And you have some essentially pristine solvent, then you have two essentially pristine solutes, and you want to mix them together and examine the chemistry that goes on between the two solutes. And then say that, well, this is does it become invalid to say that this can happen in nature because it was a human who set that up? I don't think so. I mean, that would invalidate literally all laboratory experiments of all kinds. So,
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, yeah, so my question is just like, are you saying that laboratory experiments are inadmissible in any scientific discussion? Because it seems like that would be the only conclusion that you could make with that objection.
No, yeah. So what I'm saying is, so you're talking about random code being selected by intelligent code, or the intelligent part was it set the criteria. Now, what I'm relating that to is the things that I believe were definitely created, because without them, the whole system would fall apart. And I don't see evidence that they emerged without a creator, like DNA replication, right? No matter how much, let's say modern day, let's say you've got two two genes that fuse together, right? And that's an opportunity for evolution. Am I right?
I mean,
Or
that would in itself technically be evolution if that goes on to then be passed on to future generations.
that would be evolution?
Yeah,
Yeah.
any amount of change in the genome
Alleles.
of the alleles of a population, or even just in the structure of the genome, right? So like if you have a
Yeah.
chromosome fusion that then gets passed on, all of that would be part of evolution as long as it ends up actually affecting the rest of the population. Because at a minimum, any change in allele rates or otherwise in the actual heritable genome of a population over generations is evolution. So yeah,
Right. So what I'm saying is that depends on these other things like DNA replication, transcription, translation, many times protein chaperones. I know not all proteins need chaperones, but without them,
nor
you
do
know,
all organisms need chaperone proteins.
Right.
really. Where's your evidence for that?
I mean,
'Cause that
Viruses don't need chaperones for their proteins like at all. So
right, but I don't consider
you have
those.
the virome.
Yeah, I don't
So-
consider living organisms, right?
So
Viruses
that's
and
kind of well. On the one hand, they do evolution, right? I mean, they have a genetic code which can then mutate, and they're subject to selective pressures. And it's whether or not they're alive. I think it's kind of immaterial. They do evolution, right? And that's really all that kind of matters. Is like, it's not like we pick whether or not to study something based on whether or not it's alive. It's just,
well,
are they alive? Are they not? Well, who really cares? I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter.
we are talking about biological evolution, so we're talking about the evolution of life.
Right.
Well,
And
So
so,
if
in that
all that
sense, I would
existed,
say, Sorry,
if
go
all
ahead.
that existed were viruses, then then we wouldn't have life, or at least not as we know it.
well, first, whether or not they're alive is a bit of a philosophical question, but viruses are definitely
Right.
part of biology. They're made of biomolecules. They have genetic codes. They are part of the biosphere as a whole. It's sort of like arguing that like the thing I drive down the road doesn't count as a car. It's like, well, okay, but I have to register at the DMV. I need a driver's license to drive it, and it runs on gasoline. So
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm saying archaea, prokaryotes, and eukaryotes have to have protein chaperones, or they don't exist. Am I right in saying that?
all of them.
Yes,
don't-
that all
I
of
don't
them have
think-
some proteins that will aggregate without protein chaperones, or even if they just get into a thermal problem, the proteins will denature because of the heat.
I'd be surprised if all proteins require chaperones, but I'm not entirely
Not all
sure.
proteins.
No, all
just
organisms.
all organisms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would be
Yeah,
willing
realize
to
not
cede
proteins,
that
too.
all
Maybe I don't know.
I would
They
be
might.
willing to say it may well be true that all modern organisms need chaperone and proteins for at least
Sure.
some things. However, that is not on its own a demonstration that all organisms that are possible need chaperone and protein. Like that does not follow. Because one of the things
I'll give you that. Yeah.
So one of the things
Yeah.
you have to remember is that if you use the life that currently exists as a proxy for the life that would have come about as a result of abiogenesis, you're thinking about it incorrectly, because all life that exists now exists under the standard scientific model after billions of years of evolution. So you would not get modern archaea, no matter how simple the archaeans are, out of abiogenesis. The modern archaeans are much, much, much more derived than the first life would have been. They have many, many more different proteins that have undergone much more evolution. They would be much more efficient. It's also that's also sort of the same reason why sometimes people say, oh, well, if abiogenesis is possible, how come we don't see, the spontaneous generation of primitive organisms now? And the answer is, well, anything that even started to try would almost certainly be eaten almost immediately by the much, much more efficient modern cells that exist all over the place, like bacteria and archaea and things like that.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I do disagree with your hypothesis that that the modern day, your belief that there are things before what we have today that we see. If we're going with the scientific method and what we can see and what we can observe, this is all we can see and what we can observe. I realize the hypothesis that
Not
there
true.
were simpler cells and proto cells, and then I don't know if you hold to the RNA world hypothesis or protein first or a combination of the two. But when I look at what I do see, and I do see DNA replication, transcription, translation, even topoisomerase 2 to detangle the DNA, chaperones, ATP synthase, and binary fission. When I look at those, out one, the whole system fails. You take out one of those things, and then again, extraordinary claims. I need evidence that there were simpler systems that were able to keep that cell alive.
Okay, so
Because
there's
I know
actually
they have more. Go ahead.
there's actually a very large body of literature on the evolution of ATP synthase, right? You know that ATP synthase is a category of ATPases, right? It's just flipped in what it's doing. It's like
Yes,
instead
I
of
am.
taking ATP and breaking it down, it's building it up, right? And there's a large body of literature on the actual construction of ATP synthase because it's a conglomeration of different pre-existing enzymes, right? Like the actual part where the ADP and the inorganic phosphate adhere is a helicase, or it's a repurposed helicase, right? So there's been a large body of literature on that for a number of decades. So I think this issue that we're talking about right now is and again, I missed some stuff because I apologize, I'm late.
No, Jackson, I already apologized. You are okay. I'm the one who apologized.
Regardless, I think because I missed something, I don't know what exactly I've missed, but I think we're approaching this at the wrong angle. Unless, correct me, unless it's already been agreed up to like everything is good up to like abiogenesis, I don't know why we're having the conversation about like what Luca look like. If you don't, do you accept that like humans and chimps are related, for instance?
Well, yeah, we talked about that, and I said, trying to imagine myself out of a Christian worldview, I think I would still ask the question, is there enough time for the new genes that would need to emerge? And then is consciousness, which I know is more philosophical, is the consciousness we have that chimps don't, is that possible from materialism alone?
Okay, well, I can't speak to consciousness because I'm not really aware of the literature in that field. That's not my area. But is there enough time for like 1.5% genetic differences to accrue in about 6 million years? Yeah, that's that's not just for our lineage. That's for lots of other species too. So I'm not. Well, it doesn't bother me at all.
One of the things that I want to point out is that Jackson and I are usually willing, because it's not really our area of expertise, and also because I think that there are far more problems upstream of this. We're usually willing to say, if you want to go ahead and say that God created the first life, or even in some cases maybe just eukaryotes were miraculously created, I don't really have a huge I can't agree. And the reason for that is one of the things that I talked about earlier, where it's like, okay, but you also seem to think that the Earth is 6,000 years old, that there was a global flood, and that humans and chimpanzees don't have any common ancestry. And those are things that, I'm not saying this to be mean, but from a scientific standpoint, those are all things that are functionally equivalent to a flat Earth in terms of plausibility.
Yeah, and you're not going to hurt my feelings.
I would also just say, in sort of in that same vein, that like, if these things are like way upstream of like abiogenesis, like, because if we're talking about abiogenesis, we're like, angels on a pin sort of thing, right? I mean, because you don't accept the rest of it, so why would you accept abiogenesis? It doesn't really make sense.
Well, the question was, where do I think design stops?
Sure. Okay.
And non-design starts. And so that's where I was trying to get to. There's things that I see, if they don't exist, the whole system, the random can't happen, right? No matter how much random genetic code you can acquire, if you don't have these systems in place, But
again, that's like Luca stuff. All the things you mentioned are things that are pretty much unifying for all life, right? And so if you're okay, and that's kind of my point is, if it's those things, then Dapper and I guess we're kind of already done, right? If you're saying like, well, I draw the line at the first life on this planet, then Dapper and I are just going to say, well, okay, then we agree for the most part, so that's enough. That's it.
Yeah, but the problem is that we don't actually tend to agree, because you do think that the Earth is, I'll say, less than 10,000 years. Is that fair?
I'm just saying, if you agree with that the Earth is billions of years old, and you're like, yeah, I'm fine with diversity on the whole, except for like abiogenesis. I don't know about that. If that's where it is, then we're just like, okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you think that the Earth is like 6,000 years old, humans and chimps aren't related, then yeah, these are much more pressing issues than abiogenesis.
Well, so and I said this earlier, that there's things
and
that
I apologize again.
No,
because I missed it.
Jackson, stop apologizing. I'm the one who's apologizing today. You don't have anything to apologize for. You don't have to apologize for being at work. It's fine.
Yeah. And Jackson, I was saying earlier that, when I first started in this area, I thought you were intimidating, one of the most intimidating people, because I really thought you had your stuff together. So,
well, first I have to say, I don't think I'm intimidating, but second, I take a little bit of umbrage at the idea that I don't have my stuff together.
Well, you
clearly do have your stuff
very
together.
well prepared whenever you present something. So congrats on that. And I was telling Dapper I plan on buying your book one day, and he said it's dense, so going through it slowly.
Oh,
so
yeah, it is. Which, by the way, Jackson, we got to get you sometime out to like hang out in Arizona so I can get you to sign my copy.
Absolutely, I'm definitely down. I would love to go out west again.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe we could go with something like, okay, so there's an age of the Earth problem, right?
Can I say something before that?
Sure.
Well, what I was saying earlier is that there's some things that I believe because of the evidence. Like, I do not believe in abiogenesis. I don't believe in the evolution of a prokaryote or an archaea to a eukaryotic cell, and I give my reasons why.
I'm actually happy to talk about that.
But good. Then there's some beliefs I have because I do believe the Bible, and I said, you guys are probably not going to like this. It's super subjective. Jesus said that my sheep hear my voice. I've read the Bible. I do believe Jesus is our creator. So there's some things that I hold because of that. And I was even saying earlier, I'm lactose intolerant, so I've had lactase, and so from a pretty early age, I understood that enzymes were pretty fragile, keep them away from heat. And so when I hear about soft dinosaur tissue being found, and you can actually they can see the amino acid sequence, and I think even Dapper mentioned it in a video that I was listening to of you guys, that it's similar to the ostrich.
Again,
it is, which is
we're happy to defend that.
Yeah, so you know what?
But I'm saying, so I don't have the faith that soft dinosaur tissue can last tens of millions of years old. And then
it's
something I definitely can't prove is
soft.
that.
So when you say
they can soften it. I mean, it's
when you bathe it in an acid bath for like, what is it, days on end, it becomes soft.
The original experiment, they experiment like it was intentional. The original accident that led to the discovery initially in the T-Rex femur, I believe, was a 2-week acid bath that was supposed to be an overnight acid bath.
Yeah, I mean, if you bathe anything in acid for that long, it's going to be soft.
Well, so
anyway, I'm sorry.
I want to get at the first thing. When you say that there's soft tissue found, what do you mean? What is actually found?
Collagen. That there's still the amino acid sequence.
But one of the things I want to make an important distinction is this: collagen isn't a tissue, right? Collagen is a protein. Now, the reason it's called preserved soft tissue is because the types of tissue that produce collagen are in fact soft tissue. So this is preserved from a soft tissue. But a tissue is a collection of cells of the same type that are together in some kind of unit that functions in an organ, right? So in this case, it would be dermal tissue, most likely, which would be skin tissue, right? So we have not found intact soft tissue from dinosaurs ever. However, what has been found are the degraded remains of proteins, which themselves are not intact. So when you pull these bits of preserved collagen from a dinosaur, you're not even getting actual collagen. You're getting parts of collagen, and chemically they are altered from the original collagen, not just by the breakdown, so they're no longer the actual full collagen chain, but they're also cross-linked with iron. And cross-linking is actually one of the primary ways that we preserve organic tissue in the first place. So for instance, if you tan hide to make leather, that involves extensive cross-linking of the collagen and other proteins in the skin. Similarly, have you ever dissected a frog that was preserved in formaldehyde?
No.
Maybe they just don't do that in schools anymore. I don't know. I dissected a frog that was preserved in formaldehyde.
I did it in like I think it was 8th grade, something like that, or 7th grade.
Yeah, I think about the same for me. But you're aware that biological specimens are preserved in formaldehyde and that they last more or less
Yes.
indefinitely. Well, the nature of action of the formaldehyde, the way it preserves, is by cross-linking proteins. And so it makes them into much more robust things. So we have chemical reasons why these parts of proteins, not even whole proteins, have been preserved. And there's really not much debate about this, because one of the things is, when the discovery was initially made, we come to a point where it's like, okay, well, we could say that because we currently don't have a preservation mechanism that we know about for these, that these proteins demonstrate that this otherwise thought to be 68 million year old T-Rex femur is actually thousands of years old, which would require us to throw out almost everything we know about particle physics, nuclear physics, geology, astronomy, biology. Almost everything we know about all of science would have to go out the window. Or maybe there's a preservation mechanism that we aren't currently aware of, and then when it was investigated, it was found that, in fact, yes, if the taphonomy is correct, to preserve enough of the iron from the animal's own bloodstream, that this iron can then cross-link things like collagen proteins, and that can then preserve them in a degraded form. And also, when it came to things like heme porphyrins themselves already are basically indefinite in terms of their shelf life. Hemoglobin, which is not what was found, does in fact decay relatively rapidly, but it decays into heme porphyrins, which is what was found. The interesting thing wasn't that heme porphyrins could last that long, it was just that they hadn't been washed out of the fossil by any kind of like contamination or seepage of water in and out, right? Which just means that it was in a particularly well insulated environment in terms of its time in the rock. That's all that means. Because there's no like particular shelf life on these very stable heme porphyrins. They can essentially last until like protons start decaying or something. So obviously, the sun's going to blow up or whatever. That'll cause problems. But like, there's no particular shelf life on a heme porphyrin. So I don't see why the discovery of degraded and cross-linked collagen fragments, or these essentially indefinitely long-lived porphyrins, is some kind of problem for the age of the Earth, which we also know independently from a myriad other number of sources. So why is it that you think that this is such a great counter to the great age of the Earth?
Well, so you're saying you could put leather, because you said leather is preserved with the cross-linking with iron, right?
Yeah, if you put leather in a fossil-forming area, I'm fairly confident that you could then pull it out millions of years later, put it in some acid, and then get stretchy stuff out of it afterwards.
Okay, over 65 million years.
Yeah,
68.
as long as it was in a place that was encased, where like the deposition was sufficient for it to be encased, and then that rock lasted, right? Because a number of fossils that have existed are gone now because of erosion in the past. If it erodes out of a rock and then just gets swept away or something, we're not going to find it.
When papers say like you have like deposition that's like, and they're like it's in 50,000 year intervals or whatever, that means like you have a section of like sediment that falls within that 50,000 years for like, or within that interval.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't mean you have the whole set of 50,000 years. It means like for every 50,000 years you go through the rock, you'll have like a sediment from that interval.
Yeah. So I don't see any reason.
Most of it gets eroded away.
Yeah, I don't see any reason why, presuming that it has followed all the other rules of being found that any other fossil would, right? Like not eroding away, being covered in sediment that then lithifies, that kind of thing. I don't see any reason why you couldn't get 60 whatever million year old leather that after an acid bath, you could stretch between some tweezers, which is what we have with the T-Rex, right? We have little bits of collagen fragments that you can tease apart with almost microscopically with a tweezer.
Yeah, send me information on that, because to me, I thought it was a shock, and I thought it was just
it was a shock in that it hadn't been found before.
Yeah.
Okay. And I thought it was they were instead of questioning, hey, could there be could the universe be thousands of years old or hundreds of anything under the billions that are proposed. I thought that instead of them asking that question, they were like, well, we already know what we believe. let's think of a hypothesis of how this could be preserved. Because with the young Earth creationist, creation was a miracle, so it doesn't abide by the laws of nature, and starlight didn't have to take billions of light years to reach Adam and Eve. God could have, if a creator can create the universe, he could figure out how to get light across the universe. And I know that could be a whole nother debate.
Yeah, you start getting into last Thursdayism with that kind of reasoning.
Well, so
right.
Let me explain why it was that the initial response wasn't, well, let's see how maybe the universe is younger than we think it is. Right? So the age of the Earth has, even if we ignore radiometric dating, right? So let's say we ignore it, because the idea that the Earth was much older than 10,000 years old is not something that was arrived at by radiometric dating. It was arrived at long before even radiation was discovered. So we're
before Darwin.
Oh yeah. Although not hugely before Darwin, but yeah, definitely before him. So we just have enough physical rock on the Earth that cannot be created rapidly. Physically, it's physically impossible to say that we don't have an option for an Earth that's 10,000 years old or younger. We just don't. The minimum amount of time that it takes to do things like create the limestone evident in just single formations, just the limestone in the Grand Canyon, or just the limestone in Dover, England. At the maximum growth rate for limestone of that type that can be even experimentally verified. We're talking like actual experiments in sedimentation in labs, as well as observation of the growth of sediments in nature. We cannot get away for this limestone to grow any faster than about a couple centimeters per 1,000 years. And we have hundreds of meters of it. So just the limestone on Earth on its own would be enough to say that the Earth cannot be only 10,000 years old. Plus, even if we just stick with limestone turning into, muck that's going to become limestone, turning into limestone, releases heat. And it's actually enough heat that if it all happened over the course of a flood year, even if we ignore all the other sources of heat from the flood, it would probably be enough to, cause severe boiling problems for the ocean. Because it turns out there's a whole lot of limestone. And actually, if you add up all those joules of energy, limestone has delivered more energy to the Earth than all of the known impact events from space combined. Which is just a weird little thing. It turns out limestone releases a fair bit of heat, but it does it slowly, so it doesn't matter normally. But then you get into other things, right? Like we have desert deposits. We have known desert dunes in like the time of the dinosaurs. Can't get those under a flood. We have you ever get that Himalayan pink salt? Spoiler alert for anyone who thinks that Himalayan pink salt doesn't do anything special for you. It just looks cool. But I think that's sufficient reason to get it anyway. So, do you know why
it tastes like salt?
Yeah.
So
do you know why it's pink?
I don't. I'm assuming a mineral in it.
No, it's actually fossilized algae.
Ah, that's cool.
But that's the
Red
thing.
algae?
That's the thing, though. The fossilized algae are from a sea that dried up, leaving salt inside sediment that later got turned into a mountain. But according to flood geology, all of this had to happen under a flood. You can't have a sea dry up underwater. That's not how drying works. So when you combine all of this, and then you say, okay, well, we found degraded collagen and some heme porphyrins in a T-Rex. That does not add up to, well, okay, let's ignore all the evaporites. Let's ignore all the limestone. Let's ignore all the alien sandstone. Let's ignore, again, the radiometric dating, which we don't even need. But let's ignore all of that. And instead we'll say, well, yeah, a degraded collagen molecule, Earth must be 10,000 years old. Because then it's like, well, okay, but look at all the other reasons that we know it's not. Like, this is not sufficient to make us say that, overturn all of that. Which means that the first option is you say, okay, what's more likely? Everything about geology is completely wrong, despite the fact that we use geology routinely to do things like oil exploration and find new sources of ore for metals and things like that. Like, all of that depends on our current understanding of the age of the Earth and how geology works. All of that's wrong, even though it works. Or maybe the first thing we should do is see if there's an option for preservation that we don't know about. And then when we did do that, we found out that, yeah, no, there is. Like, why does that not seem like the most reasonable course of action to you?
Well, how do they test it? How do they know
also,
it last 68 million years old. And now again, I'm willing to learn. It just does seem like a stretch.
So
Like
there are, I mean,
for leather to last 68 million years.
I mean,
old.
you
because-
can do like small scale experiments, right? And like
Okay.
extrapolate these things, right? Once you figure out like how molecular interactions work and you know like about the physics of how those things work, the physics isn't going to change today or 65 million years in the past or 65 million years from now. The physics is still going to work. So if you can determine, and that's also how we know that radiometric dating is true and accurate, because the physics isn't going to change. There's like no way for it to change without massive consequences for all of life and the universe.
Yeah, that's one of the
So-
important things. Is any physics that you change to say, well, this preservation is now going to not work, has knock-on effects, right? Like it's going to change chemistry everywhere. So yeah, if you can
Right.
figure out the actual reaction rate, and if the reaction rate is low enough that you can actually calculate, right, then you can figure out how long you have as a shelf life for this molecule. And in the case of things like heme porphyrins or cross-linked collagen fibers, it's more or less indefinite.
Yeah. Well,
It's
yeah.
like
I'll look into
we
it
use-
more.
Well, you know, because like in medicine, doctors use like gallium and other like very short-lived radioisotopes, right, to study different biochemical pathways. They
Yes.
inject you with some little. Yeah, it's the same principles that allow like physicists to understand how long that's going to last in your body. Like the exact same principles will tell you that, like, you know, rubidium strontium is going to take hundreds of millions of years to degrade or whatever, right? It's the same principles. It's not like they have to come up with a totally different set of principles to understand both of these things. But also to piggyback off of Dapper's point about the limestone stuff, I just want to point out another one that he's aware of. There are rock formations. The limestone also chalk. All these or a lot of sedimentary rocks are made of organisms, right?
Mhm.
They're shelly organisms that lived, died, and then their shells sank to the bottom of the body of water they were in, and then they piled up successively.
Yeah, like
Over
the White
eons.
Cliffs of Dover is basically just solid fossil.
Yeah, you're talking about diatoms, diatomaceous
Yeah,
earth.
diatoms, radiolarians, coccolithophores, foraminifera, all these guys. Yeah, these things had to live, right? They had to exist in a place at a certain time and then die and have their shells rained out. There's no way that many diatoms could have existed in that place at one time. It's not physically possible. Further, there are other formations which are composed of, and this is what I was referring to, like belemnites, which are little ancient, like squid relatives. They have these little bullet-shaped shells. There are fossil deposits which are composed, the researchers calculated, of quadrillions of belemnites. Quadrillions. Now these are like layered in different layers stacked atop each other, right? There's again,
there are places where
no
the ground
way.
is basically just made of fossil squid. They're not technically
There's
squid, but they're
no
almost
way.
squid.
They could have all the quadrillions of them could have lived in that one spot at the same time, right? Like there's no parallel for that in any organism that we're aware, you know, any eukaryotes, I should say,
Yeah.
that we're aware of.
And when we
it's
say
simply not feasible.
When we say quadrillions, we don't mean over the world, right? We're talking like in
A
this
single
part,
fossil deposit,
right? Like in this part of Montana, there are quadrillions of belemnite shells. So,
Yeah.
like, was the one patch of the flood just composed of solid We'll just call them squid because they're almost squid, right? They're not quite.
yeah.
So you can think of them as squids with a tiny internal shell. So was this whole patch of the flood just wall to wall with squid flesh? How did they collect there? What were they doing before the flood? What did they all get born during the flood? Like, how does any of this cohere?
There's a food chain, right?
Yeah, and
There's a food chain because they were eating smaller organisms, which also
Right.
must have had to exist in far greater number than those quadrillions
Right.
of squid were.
So we
because that's how food works.
we get to this problem where, Ken Ham likes to say, "Oh, if there were a global flood, I'd expect to see billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water all over the earth." Well, okay, but we don't find billions. We find multiple quadrillions, hundreds of times more than could reasonably expected to be lived. Yeah, at least
quadrillions.
It could well be
And
into the tens or hundreds of quadrillions.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, man, this is why I love debates. I always have a lot to research when I'm done.
Well, hey, that's good.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to digging into these things.
But let's say, for the sake of argument, that we are reporting this fact about the abundance of fossils accurately. Do you see why that causes a problem for any kind of flood model for the formation of these rock layers?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay. Well, that's good, right? Because the thing is, like, look, I'm not expecting you to take me and Jackson's word for anything just on the top, on the fly.
Just don't.
Right.
Don't take our word for it.
Neither of us are the ones who did the primary research, where I wouldn't call myself an expert. I'm just a very well-informed... I'm someone who, as a layman, makes it a conscious effort to stay as informed as I reasonably can be on these topics.
He drinks and he knows things.
Yes, I am in fact a taller version of Tyrion, a taller dinosaurian version of Tyrion Lannister. But like, you can see why all of this stuff stacking up together, and we don't even have to get into radiometric dating to talk about these things, right? Means that, one, the flood story as the primary cause of the geological formations of the Phanerozoic, which is what most flood geologists would claim, has what I would call insurmountable and very obvious problems which preclude the possibility. And two, why that, therefore, the idea that paleontologists finding unexpected remains of proteins from soft tissues would not on its own be sufficient to make those paleontologists question the age of the Earth on the whole.
Yeah, that's understandable.
Okay.
And I'll have to look into it more. And like I said, I heard about, what did I tell you a little bit ago? The fluid from a mosasaur, the retina fluid from a mosasaur was found, and I've got to make sure that's factual and not just a false young Earth creationist talking
Retinal
point.
fluid?
I even heard about a nerve cell.
I hadn't even heard of that.
Yeah,
so I hadn't heard the nerve cell thing. I've heard it said that nerve cells have been found, but it wasn't the nerve cells. It was the holes where the nerve cells previously went into the skull, which is not the same.
Right.
But I had not heard the retinal fluid. That's a new one on me.
Yeah, so
I'll be fascinated to find something on that. I don't know that I can speak to it too much.
You said a mosasaur?
Yeah.
Okay. It looks like it's the first thing that I found was ICR, but I will go down to the
the fact that ICR is talking about the most doesn't mean that it's not a thing. Sometimes they do latch on to stories, and I think they would misinterpret them, but that doesn't mean that the story doesn't exist.
Wait, hold on a second. Brian Thomas, mosasaur fossils have been recovered from blah, 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 all over the world. Conventional wisdom holds. Best preserved mosasaur remains found in Kansas, kept in California Museum for over 40 years. Paleontologist Luis, Schapp led a team of scientists. Researchers analyzed purple residue in the eyeball, and they represent remnants of the retina. Purple residue in the... Let's see, only citations. How did he not link it at the bottom? He cited a different... Oh, wait, hold on. Is this it? Okay.
Jackson's
mosasaurs.
Tracing down the...
I'm sorry.
One thing I will say is that it's actually not that unusual to find preserved pigments, right? So, for instance, I don't know if you can tell, but I have a slideshow of fossils playing in the bottom right just because, well, I wanted to balance it, and I didn't have much else to shove in there, so I put in a slideshow of fossils. But some of the fossils that show up are cephalopods. And actually, cephalopod fossils, while very rare on their own, when they do show up, they often actually preserve things like the ink sacs that cephalopods use to help escape. And in fact, in one instance that I know of, an artist used the preserved pigments from the preserved ink sac to make a painting of the octopus that had been preserved. Unfortunately, I couldn't find out much more about the octopus other than that she had done this, because all the links I followed just said it was from Lebanon, which is not really sufficient for me to say, well, like, where was it from, what was the species. But
Oh,
So
it
yeah.
had I believe this is their retinal melanosomes,
Oh, that would that's
believe.
definitely something that could preserve.
which in fairness, there are lots of non-even theropods which have also been preserved with melanosomes, like in their
Yeah, feathers
stuff.
and
So again, that's another like really strong like protein. So I'm not super surprised by that. I mean, that's really cool.
yeah.
It is really cool.
Actually,
but
melanin
I'm not.
is used in certain contexts as a structural protein. So, the dark melanin, as opposed to the rufous melanin, is actually a fairly strong protein, which is why it's used structurally in certain things like some feathers. Like one of the reasons that a lot of birds are black is because black feathers don't wear out as much because of the melanin that creates the blackness of the feathers, basically.
That's why like terns and things have black tips on their wings.
Yeah, because the wingtips.
Because those are the parts that. Go ahead, Depper.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, those get the most wear. So if they're black tipped, they wear out less than the other colored parts of the feathers.
It is. Yeah, this is really cool, and I'll have to definitely read through this. But I'm not super surprised by them finding melanosomes, because lots of other fossils have preserved melanosomes. Like that's what Julia Clark kind of became famous when she found the Microraptor melanosomes and found out they were black. So it was like it's sort of iridescent black.
Is that because raptors are less than 10,000 years old? I'm just kidding.
Probably not. It's actually also why we know that Alan Fiducia is full of it, because his claims that these feathers are just collagen fibers directly contradicted by the fact that they have melanosomes, because collagen fibers don't have
nothing like collagen.
Well, yeah, but also collagen fibers don't have melanosomes, which is one of the reasons why we know that these are in fact feathers or proto-feathers and not collagen fraying from a dead body. Also, the fact is that he's identified things as collagen fibers that were actually tool marks made by the person preparing the fossil for display.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So, in
addition to
taking a second to just dunk on Alan Fiducia because he really annoys me.
Or Dapper, that time that he thought Darren Naish's like April Fool's post was an actual
he wrote
article.
He wrote a whole blog post about Darren Naish coming out in his favor, and it was like, dude, the thing was posted on April 1st. What are you talking about?
It was like clearly joking, because he was like, some birds came from like Spinosaurs, some birds came from Tyrannosaurs. It was like bonkers, and he thought it was real, and man.
Or Alan Fiducia.
You gotta be so skeptical on the internet.
Especially on April 1st.
Yeah, right, yeah. I didn't mean for this to become a young Earth creationist thing, but I do appreciate your feedback.
Hey,
giving me a lot to look into.
Well, there's a few things. One is when it comes to young Earth creationism, right? There's a whole lot before you get to abiogenesis that there is to discuss. So, like we said earlier, if you were to say, the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and eukaryotes share common ancestry. But I think that certain aspects of like the prokaryote to eukaryote transition or abiogenesis were just God did a thing. I'd say, well, I don't know that you have sufficient evidence to conclude that. But on the other hand, like I'm very happy that you're accepting the actual age of the Earth and common ancestry for at least most macroscopic organisms and things like this. But when you're not at that point, it's a little ridiculous. And now, I'm not trying to be insulting here, but it's sort of like, you ever heard of the crisis in cosmology?
I'm sorry?
Have you heard of the crisis in cosmology?
No.
Basically, I don't know all the things about it, but basically, different measures of the age of the universe are varying by like a few 100 million years based on different sets of data. And there's not a clear answer as to which one is correct or why there's a difference there. And so this is a big thing in cosmology, right? Cosmology, they're like, oh, how do we figure this out? And it's an area of active research and whatnot. To me, arguing about abiogenesis, if someone is a young Earth creationist, feels like arguing about that crisis in cosmology with someone who's going to go ahead and say, well, yeah, but the Earth's flat. It's like, hold up. Before we get to, fiddly bits about whether the universe is, this many billion years old versus this other number that's like a few 100 million years old, a few 100 million years different. you don't think the Earth moves around the sun. Like, we've got a lot more to back up and figure out. And so that's why for me, I want to just drill into things like, okay, so if you're a young Earth creationist, we know that's wrong for, like, I don't know, many, many reasons, far more than I could count. So I think it's very important to try to get to the point where we can say, okay, let's agree with as much science as we can, because also abiogenesis is something that's still very much an open question, right? Like, even the people who are researching it don't have all the answers because it's a relatively new field. Whereas evolutionary biology or geology or like nuclear physics, some of the other things that young Earth creationism contradicts, are much older fields about which we have very firm conclusions about things like how fast certain rocks can form, how radiation and radioactive decay works and has to work physically. We have things like transitional fossils, which actually also would be an interesting thing to talk about, transitional fossils, because I'm assuming you would reject their existence as evolutionary transitions.
Well, first, let me say I disagree. To me, whether there's a creator or not is the first question.
Yeah, but
because if there is a creator, because if there, and for me, I went to abiogenesis to confirm, or whether there was a creator or not. That was my path.
Okay.
And so I think that's the first question, because then if there is a creator, well, then there is opportunity for a young universe. If there's no creator, there is no.
Well,
that's not on the table.
We aren't going to try to push atheism, right?
Yeah.
We're not here to do that. Okay, so we really don't care, right? If you want to believe there's a God, and also that the Earth is 14, or the Earth is like 4.5 billion years old, and all life is related, that's fine. Whether or not you believe there's a God and that he started that or not, like, irrelevant. It's totally irrelevant to us. If you want to believe it, fine. If you don't, also fine. We don't care. That's not an issue with us.
My goal is never to change someone's belief in there being a creator at all, or to get them to convert into or out of any religious idea, except in that religious idea contradicts science. So, for instance, if you wanted to go from being a young Earth creationist to taking more or less the biologos approach, okay, like, I have absolutely no quarrel with biologos.
Same.
Now, do I think that some of their theological conclusions have some iffiness? Sure, maybe, but I don't care. Their science is fine, and as far as this channel is concerned, that means they're fine.
Well, I think it is relevant, the God thing, because I thought our question was, where do I think design stops and evolution begins? Like, where do I think, based on what I see as the evidence, where something was created and then evolution took over without that direct influence?
Right, but as a young Earth creationist, you have to conclude that that's somewhere, like, upstream of eukaryotes, right? Like, you think that dogs and cats aren't related, that chimps and humans aren't related. So even if you think that evolution couldn't account for, microtubules, or ATP synthase, or these various other proteins, like, you also don't think that it counts for common ancestry of all the great apes, or all of the carnivores.
Well, and for the sake of argument, I'm willing to lay my Christian faith aside. So I'm willing to look at things just based on the evidence that I see. And I was hoping to really hammer home and talk about some of these syllogisms about abiogenesis. And then, we did talk about the eukaryotic cell, the motor proteins in the microtubules. And
okay. Well, I'll tell you what.
So what if I told you, well, actually, I am also kind of curious with, like, because you mentioned eukaryogenesis earlier, and I said there are lots of papers on it. There aren't any, like, there's like 1 or 2 books I'm aware of that go into it in any depth. Like the Vital Question by Nick Lane is one of them.
Right. Yeah.
It's the part of the reason that most books about, like, evolution broadly really don't go into it is it's a very complicated subject, and let's be honest, most people don't care about cell biology.
That's true.
Like, that's kind of the stuff that's like, oh, cool, kind of keep moving. Like, we got to get to the dinosaurs. That's the part that's really cool. But if, like,
where I'm the opposite, I feel like you guys are going. Where I feel like we're coming at this from different angles. To me, abiogenesis is the most important.
Well, I have an idea. Let's take a quick break so everyone can get a fresh beverage, use the bathroom, whatever you need, because we've been going for almost an hour and a half. I think it's
I didn't realize it.
Yeah, I mean, these are fun conversations, so we can can go for a while on these. So let's just take a quick, 5-ish minute break. We'll come back, and then we can talk about Jackson. Would you be okay with talking about some aspects of Eukaryogenesis, or?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay, well, let's do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put everybody into the intermission zone where they can be entertained by the musical stylings of Beethoven. I'll come back, do a little bit of quick post-break stuff, and then we will go into some Eukaryogenesis, which I think will mostly be on Jackson, because I'm very confident that he's far better informed on the topic than I am.
I think you're overplaying me.
I don't, thank you.
Could I give my favorite syllogism about abiogenesis?
Well, let's do it after we come back from the break.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, we will be back in a few minutes. And yeah, we will continue on. We'll get Jeremy's syllogism, and then we'll go into Jackson. And I think that'll be a fun topic. So see you on the other side of the break. Enjoy the musical stylings of Beethoven. No relation. All right, and we are back. Thank you, everyone, who stuck with me, which I see some of you did. I want to say, if you haven't hit like, please do. I noticed that there are a fair few of you who have not hit like. Also, Jeremy, do you think that if we went to a Q&A in about an hour, that would work for you?
Ooh, it's probably getting too late. Could we?
Want to do it a half hour?
What about half an?
Yeah, let's do a half an hour then. Okay, so in a half an hour, we'll do a Q&A. So what is your syllogism? And then we'll get Jackson's response, and in about a half hour, so at like, I don't know what time zone you're in, but like at 7 Pacific, we'll do a Q&A session.
Yeah, is that 10? How many hours are we in different?
I'm not sure where you are, so I'm not positive.
North Carolina.
Okay, so you're
I'm talking to
Eastern?
somebody in
But
California.
you're
that
an
has-
hour ahead of me.
Yeah, you're 2 hours ahead of me and an hour ahead of Jackson. So this would be at
Oh yeah.
8 your time.
Oh yeah. That's great.
Okay, cool.
That's perfect.
So let's hear your syllogism.
All right. So this is on the premise that mRNA is code, and I like to say if Morse code is code, then mRNA is code. And then I'm defining a machine as a structure with multiple moving parts that accomplishes work. Because a lot of people try to tell me that a lot of these, either the ribosome or different protein enzymes are not machines.
How are you
So
defining
here's
work?
man, somebody asked me that the other day, and I had an answer. Gosh, it might have been Dapper too.
Well, so the typical physics definition is work is the displacement of mass over time. Or, oh, sorry, over distance.
No, gosh, I think it was you, Dapper, that asked me on Facebook, and I had an answer. Something like accomplishing an objective.
Okay, I think that's
To dig a hole. To dig a hole is work, but the objective is to
okay.
to dig that hole. Okay, so premise 1: code and the machinery. I'm sorry, woof, man, it's been a while now. Code and the machinery to translate that code into machine parts only comes from intelligence.
Oh, by the way,
Premise.
I was informed. Yeah, it's almost 8 now, so the Q&A would be at 8:30. Is that still okay?
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay, just want to make sure. Sorry.
Premise
Maya.
2. Premise 2 is that biological translation involves code, mRNA, and the machinery, ribosome, to turn that code into more machine parts, different proteins. And then the conclusion is that biological translation came from intelligence. So if you're imagining with me, something that I think is similar, not exactly the same as like a 3D printer. It involves code and the machinery to turn that code into functional parts, right? And they can be machine parts if they're moving and stuff like that. And so, I just don't believe that something like that. And I'll go with the evidence. If there's evidence that code and the machinery to turn that code into more machine parts emerges without intelligent planning, then I'll accept abiogenesis. But when I look at the RNA world hypothesis or the protein first model or, a combination of the two, I don't see anything close to how that could emerge. That I see things that were clearly the result of intelligent planning. What are your thoughts on that?
Well,
Can you say premise 1 again?
yeah.
Yeah, code and the machinery to turn that code into machine parts only comes from intelligent planning.
I would need. So first, there's a few things. One is it sounds like an argument from incredulity. It doesn't make sense to me, therefore it didn't happen. Second part is I don't see any reason to accept premise 1.
Yeah.
The way you defined it, at least. The way you defined it, I don't see why premise 1 follows. Or, sorry, is true.
Okay. Can you give an example? So to me, the argument from incredulity, isn't the scientific method about finding out, anything that we know from a scientific fact, isn't it an argument from incredulity? Like, I believe that water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit at standard pressure.
Well, no,
because
that's not experimental. That's definitive. That's been defined by a person who invented the Fahrenheit scale. Similarly, no experiment was done to determine that water boils at 100 Celsius. The Celsius scale was created with the definition that at sea pressure, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. You'd have to pick something else.
All right, what's a scientific fact that you know? Something that you know is true.
A universal common ancestry is true.
All right, something else. Very good.
So are you saying, you can't just measure it, right? It would say that's like an inference, but it's an inference based on it seems like you're just saying, well, I've only seen this happen this way before, therefore I don't believe that it would happen naturally.
Right.
Yeah, basically what your argument is.
Let's go to the House of Cards.
But that's the argument from incredulity is what Dapper was referring to.
Was
that this is how I... Go ahead.
I was going to say, is that what saying, so I believe that a house of cards, at least 3 stories high, could only emerge from a human doing it or from an intelligent being doing it.
Well, that's kind of the problem with... What's the problem with analogies, right? It's when you start the problem with analogies or using that to represent actual things in reality is that like there's obviously a there's not going to be correspondence for everything in the analogy. Like there are no natural houses of cards.
No,
That's
no,
a
but
thing
I'm saying,
humans
but
invent.
this is, I'm talking about the argument from incredulity. Is that an argument from incredulity for me to say that there's a house of cards, that a house of cards that's at least 3 stories high only comes from an intelligent being doing it? Is that an argument from incredulity?
If we could say that we had found houses of cards in places where we had good reason to think there had been no humans, then yes, it would be. That's where the disanalogy comes from. So the only intelligent agents that we have definitive evidence of doing things are things that are humans or like humans, right? Like maybe you can argue that stone tools used by chimpanzees count. Sure, fine. But we then find evidence of things that definitively have not been created by these known intelligent agents. And so if you want to say that therefore I propose those things were created by intelligent agents without the actual intelligent agent being very obviously involved in an observable manner in the past, then we cannot jump to the conclusion that it was definitely required, especially when we have known mechanisms, which we do, for how such things can come about, not in the case of actual houses of cards, but in the case of things like biology, which is the ultimate topic. We do, in fact, have known mechanisms. Let me finish the sentence. We do, in fact, have known mechanisms where those things actually do come about without direct intelligent input. Because we have seen the evolution of things like irreducibly complex systems, new proteins, new anatomical features, not just in the fossil record, but like we can watch these kinds of things happen in real time in living organisms that we're currently observing both in the wild and in the lab. So when you say a house of cards needs an intelligent agent, I can say, well, for various reasons, yeah, that does seem like a reasonable thing, and it doesn't seem like an argument from incredulity, because we know that all the houses of cards we've observed have come from places where there are evident intelligent designers. We know that the ones that we have observed coming about do in fact come about as a result of intelligent designers, but we don't have that option for life. We don't have any known instances of intelligent design of life. We do have known evidences or known instances of the creation of new proteins, new genes, new anatomical structures without any observable input from an intelligent designer. And we don't have any particular evidence of intelligent design that is evident in the distant past, because again, the only evidenced intelligent designers that we have working in the natural world are all available to our observation right now.
I have something.
And yeah, so I'm done there.
Nestle sent me a paper titled "How Should We Think About the Ribosome?" and I just want to read what I think is a relevant portion.
Okay.
If you'll indulge me.
Yes.
One might be willing to overlook the polite fictions embedded in a movie about like an animation of how ribosomes work, if it did not have another more serious shortcoming for its naive viewers, e.g. students. Like the structure on which it is based, the movie will actively invite viewers to think that the ribosome works the same way as a clock or a machine for making candy bars. It is no help that macromolecules capable of coupling the hydrolysis of nucleoside triphosphates to directional movements, e.g. the translocating ribosome, are commonly called molecular machines. The use of the word machine in this context is pernicious because of the implication that the functional properties of macromolecules can be explained mechanically, which is simply not true. So,
well, there's moving parts. I mean, of course, it's not. I mean, it's made of molecules and not.
There is a greater degree of like stochasticity to the way that these molecules are interacting with each other and interacting within you than like what appears or when we read about things. Like the ATP synthase is an example that I've seen used before. Right, like when we see videos about like how the ATP synthase works, right? It's a little turn, right? You get your ADP and your inorganic phosphate. You get together, your proton goes through, and you get a turn, and then do it again, get a turn. Well, that's not really how that works, right? You get turns in one direction most of the time, but then other times you might get your stochastic turn in the opposite direction, right? It's about the probability of these things happening. It's not a perfect again one-to-one correspondence with like an analogy, which is again why I don't use analogies when it comes to a lot of times when it comes to arguing about evolution, because in my experience analogies oversimplify things and they paint a picture of what the thing actually isn't. So I don't know. That's just my opinion. I don't know. Have we hashed out that portion, or are we ready to go to Eukaryogenesis?
I want to respond to. Sorry, I want to respond to a couple things that Dapper said.
Okay.
So if you saw something that looked like a house of cards on another planet,
Mm-hmm.
of course they wouldn't need to be made of paper, they wouldn't need to have spades or whatever on them, but just these flat rectangles, and then they were set up like that. Would you not conclude that there was an intelligent being here? I mean, it doesn't have to be human; it could be some kind of alien intelligent species. But wouldn't you agree that we don't see that emerging without intelligence involved?
I probably would, but we do see
Okay.
biological novelty emerging without intelligence being observably
Yeah, but
involved.
there's all these things. Again, going back to where I'm saying that, the original question was, well, what do I see as designed and what do I see as not designed? That could come about by random mutation and natural selection. And I'm saying when you take it away and the whole system falls apart, I see that as designed. And I see biological translation as something that was designed, because if you take a portion of that out, it falls apart. The only exception might be where some of the proteins in the ribosome, it could still do its translating, but it's not as
But that was
sturdy out the proteins. But I'm saying I want you guys to look at it like this: that we literally have code, and we've got something turning that code into two functional parts for the cell. And I'm asking you to look at that and be really skeptical about it, because I think it's an extraordinary claim. Again, going back to the Carl Sagan quote, it's an extraordinary claim to say that system emerged without intelligent planning, and then that system's not enough. You've got to have the other things, transcription or something, or even a precursor to that. And I'm willing to see precursors to that this evolutionary, and then the other things, the chaperones,
Well, okay, so
right. So first, I think we're approaching this in the wrong direction. I think again we need to start with like the things we need, because we keep going back and forth on this. Is I hear what you're saying. I'm saying I hear what you're saying. Is you are saying, I want to steel man you, that these things without which the cell, the organism would just fall apart. It would not exist. Like transcription, translation. I hear you when you say that. And our response to that was, okay, but these are things that arose prior to the last common ancestor of all extant organisms. So if you want to go there, if you want to start with that and say those things were designed, then to us, it seems like you are seeding all of extant life.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You see where we're coming from when we say that, right?
No, what do you mean by seeding all extant life?
Maybe
you are saying that all of these are related by common descent because they all descended from an ancestor who had these systems already in place.
Right.
Well, not necessarily. Then we get into first I'm just saying that there's a creator. So as we look at evolution.
Hold on, real quick. I want to explain why it seems like that to us.
Okay.
So, in here I will use some kind of analogy, right? So, we'll go with a history analogy, right? Let's say that you were arguing with, let's go with someone. I don't want to make it personal about you, right? So let's say someone is arguing with a historian, right? And they want to go ahead and say that they think that the cause of, say, the Peloponnesian War was that there were way too many immigrants from Australia. And the historian's like, well, no, because the Peloponnesian Wars were in Iron Age Greece, and like there was the whole like Delian, like there's a whole lot of reasons why no, that doesn't make sense. And then this guy is like, yeah, but okay, but how did people get to Australia in the first place? Like, well, who cares? We're way far away from that. And so as a young Earth creationist, it's a little frustrating for us to have a conversation with a young Earth creationist who thinks that, say, that humans and chimpanzees don't share a common ancestor, but that tigers and lions do, despite tigers and lions being many times more different genetically than humans and chimpanzees.
Right.
And then to have him back that up by saying, yeah, but how did the first eukaryote evolve? Well, even if we couldn't explain that, do you understand why that's frustrating to say that you're going that far back to defend the idea that humans and chimpanzees don't have a common ancestor? Because to me, if you maintain the position that those two things don't have common ancestry, you cannot back it up with this. So if you would like to say that you do in fact accept common ancestry of eukaryotes, at least for the sake of the argument, that might be helpful. I don't know. Maybe Jackson, I'll get your response to that real quick, and then we'll switch to Gordon. But don't let your response go too long. I'm going to time you.
Talking about me
or Jackson?
You just want to make sure that do you agree with what I just said, Jackson?
Oh yeah, that's
okay. Cool.
That's fine. Yeah.
Then yeah, Jeremy, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, gotcha. And I'm saying I want you to put my young Earth creationism aside because it's only possible with a creator. And I'm taking this as first we've got to ask the question to understand evolution properly. I think we've got to ask: is there a designer at all? Not the Christian God, just a general designer or designers, and they could even be dead, right? So I'm asking the question because that is our question. The question is, what do we see that's designed? And you were asking me what is designed and when did just random mutation take over in natural selection? And so I'm trying to start out by saying, well, this is why I believe in a designer to begin with. So don't even think about my young Earth creationism right now, because that's to me, that's way down the line. Right. That's not even the topic right now. The topic is, do we have a creator? And I'm saying by what we see inside living cells, those systems only emerge from engineering, intelligent planning.
Listen,
and
we'll just agree that there is a designer, that a god of some sort exists. Okay, that step one is down. Now go from there. Now what?
Okay, then it's, hey, I see some systems inside eukaryotic cells that are not in prokaryotic cells that I have a hard time believing emerge from.
Okay, well then, that's a great segue to eukaryogenesis.
Okay, so given that, but again, we're back to the issue of, do you therefore accept? Because we're like, let's say we're all on the same page. We're all like, it's the same God. We all believe it. Are you
Wait, Jackson, did you say that you're a theist?
For the sake of argument, sure.
Okay,
why not?
Okay, I just thought you were an atheist. I don't know.
For the sake of, we're talking about eukaryotes now. We're talking about the base of eukarya, right?
Right.
So, are you therefore saying you are okay with like all animals sharing common ancestry?
Yeah, and what I would say then is, I would be if given enough time, and I think you kind of referenced that, because again, I'm putting myself in your billions of year paradigm.
Okay, I have a quick idea. Jeremy, I'm having a good time. I hope you are too. I think Jackson is. What if we had a separate time frame set up?
Can we do the eukaryogenesis thing though?
Yeah. I kind of want that's why I'm saying this. What if we had a separate time to talk about the age of the Earth? Like maybe in a month or two.
Do more homework.
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
That way I can study the things.
All right, so in that case, let's table the discussion on the age of the Earth. We can try to set up another date for that, like maybe in a month or two, and let's talk about eukaryogenesis. So Jackson, that's exactly why I was trying to say it. So take it away.
Okay.
So I will be the first person to admit that there are obvious areas of future research in eukaryogenesis. Right? No one here is going to say that like everything is known. That would be ridiculous. But there are some pretty major pieces of evidence in favor of like chloroplasts and mitochondria being endosymbiotes, right? Being derived from bacteria.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. I read Fazal Rana's thoughts on that.
So, yeah, I've talked with him too, and he didn't really want to talk about it. But so we did one time, and then later he kind of dropped it. But so one of the major pieces of evidence is like, aside from, they have double membranes, right? That's not known for any of our organelles. All of our organelles are like single membrane, right? Like the nucleus, right? Isn't it the nucleus? Yeah, the nucleus has a single membrane. Your endoplasmic reticulum, right? All these things have one membrane, but your mitochondria and chloroplast have this double membrane system, right? They also have their own genomes, which again, none of our other organelles have. None of them have their own genome. But also, they have. So when an amino acid chain starts, do you know what the start codon is?
I don't know it.
It's an amino acid called methionine. And all eukaryotes and archaeans both start their amino acid chains with methionine. There are different stop codons, but that's the start codon. Now, bacteria, including chloroplast and mitochondria, start their amino acid chain with N-formyl methionine. That is unique to bacteria, right? That's one of the reasons. So back in, I think it was the 80s, was when they were finally like getting in there and starting to like detail the genetics and the internal workings of the mitochondria, is like back in the 70s and 80s. So when they finally start doing that, they're like, wow, this thing has its own like bacterial ribosomes. It has its own it has like bacterial genetic structure, right? It has a circular genome, just like bacteria, and it starts its amino acid chains with N-formyl methionine, like bacteria. These are all things that would argue very strongly, have convinced the researchers that. And the funny thing is, actually, chloroplasts were accepted as being bacterial endosymbionts before mitochondria were. And part of the reason is mitochondria has a bunch of codons that are not in like other organisms, so that was a little weird. But cyanobacteria, like was it Gliotrachea, I think. No, that's not. No, is it? Maybe it might have been. Anyway, there are cyanobacteria that are like almost identical to like chloroplasts.
Hey, real quick, remember that time that you said that I was underselling you? No, I wasn't. Sorry, overselling you. No, I wasn't.
Anyways, and they are structured internally. They're like their internal structure is like nearly identical, and their genes are very similar. Like we can root again, this is a problem with mitochondria. They're so derived, and they've lost so many genes. It's hard to pin them exactly on the phylogenetic tree. It's like somewhere around alpha proteobacteria. But with cyanobacteria, it's like with chloroplasts, it's like, oh yeah, they're in the cyanobacteria. This is very, very clear.
Ah, interesting.
So given all of those, like it seems pretty clear that these are bacterial endosymbionts. What are your thoughts on that?
That sounds very convincing, and I appreciate you telling me that. So I've got to study that.
So I have been working on a secret project, I'll tell you. And
this is breaking news.
Written a whole section about endosymbiosis fairly recently, so a lot of it's still on the forefront. But yeah, so I actually went back and I read the original like Lynn Margulis paper when she first proposed endosymbiosis, and she was building off work from like these guys in Russia from like the 1920s or whatever. But no one really heard. No one in the West knew,
Well, yeah, because they're
with a lot of that research.
Communists,
right? Exactly. And so, and then so that research started in the 70s. Then by the 80s, especially by the late 80s, researchers were kind of like, yeah, okay, chloroplast, yeah, I see it. Mitochondria, I still have some questions, but by the 90s, it was really hammered that, like, yeah, mitochondria is also bacterial endosymbiont. And today, it's more developments have come out. So, for instance, the whole, like, well, how did, an Archaean phagocytize a bacterium? Archaeans don't phagocytize, so how did that happen? That's, again, a fair question. But there are bacteria that have endosymbionts within them. The cyanobacterium, Pleurocapsa minor, has spirochetes within it. And there's also have you heard of, it's got a spirochete within it.
Yeah, right. That's what I was imagining.
I mean, fair. And there's also, are you familiar with the Loki Archaeota?
No, I saw the show Loki, but no.
Well, the Loki Archaeota, which are actually named because they're also from an area near Norway. It's called Loki's Castle. So it's a group of Archaeans which are very similar genetically to eukaryotes. So similar, in fact, that eukarya on phylogenetic trees either nests sister to Loki Archaeota or within Loki Archaeota. That's how close they are to each other. And so you have like, they also have like, and this is also what I was thinking about the microtubules. These guys actually have actin. They don't use it as a cytoskeleton, but they have it within them. Like the genetic homologs of actin genes have been found within these guys. And so that's also why I was like, I wouldn't use microtubules as the argument.
Got it.
And so another thing is one of their guys recently has been found called Prometheoarchaeum, because they are doing all the fun names. And Prometheoarchaeum does not it doesn't phagocytize. It entangles. So it basically has these long tendrils, and it like wraps around things, and it like absorbs them that way instead of phagocytosis. And also really cool, it participates in what's called centrophy. Basically, it passes molecules to and from other prokaryotes, right? So basically, centrophy is what's happening within is the hypothesis that the ancestral Archaean was in like the symbiotic relationship with a bacterium, and then eventually it, took in the bacterium, and now that bacterium is our mitochondria, right?
Yeah,
it's the hydrogen hypothesis. All right, so that's Prometheoarchaeum does actually participate in those types of relationships with other bacterium, with bacterium, because it's an Archaean. And so, on the whole, the case for endosymbiosis seems to me pretty strong. But that's my thoughts.
Well, I appreciate that, and you've given me a lot to look into, so thank you.
Yeah. I don't know. Where else did you there, and like I said, there's lots and lots of stuff we still don't know. That the geneticists and microbiologists still don't know about endosymbiosis. It is by no means an answered question. There's lots of really neat stuff, which I'm sure, years from now there's gonna be cool papers on it. But as it stands currently, it seems like the best explanation for like mitochondrial chloroplast is endosymbiosis.
Well, I'll look into it.
Yeah,
and then there's even things like nucleomorphs, where like some larger like unicellular eukaryotes have engulfed smaller unicellular eukaryotes, and while those smaller ones are still like in the process of losing all their parts, they still retain like a vestigial nucleus. That's again like another.
Yeah, there are actually like currently ongoing instances of like novel endosymbiosis.
Like Polynella taking in a novel. I think it's Senecacoccus is the cyanobacterium. It's basically
so many cool words in your head.
It's basically a protist taking in a different species of cyanobacterium than all the plants have. Essentially, it's a different type of chloroplast. Or is going to be
project. Is this project of yours a book or a video?
That's a good question. But you'll all know. I hope sooner rather than later. But it
that
probably
sounds like
later
a video.
rather than sooner.
Oh, maybe not then.
Yeah, sooner than later. Yeah,
or later rather than sooner. But
okay,
whatever.
So
I look forward to it.
So my question is, can you see why the mainstream scientific community is not seeing eukaryogenesis as a huge problem and more as a set of questions, some of which we have there are some decent answers for, and some of which are still like, we don't have all the answers to all the questions about it. But that's science, right? Science is not here to say that we have every last answer to every last question. It's a process of trying to discover new things. But can you see why that there are indications that we have that eukaryotes descend from archaeans, or at least things that are very similar to archaeans, and how we have good ideas as to how certain important aspects of that happen, including the microtubules, because as you remember, as we talked about, the Loki archaeota have homologs to the microtubules that for you was the big, or a big part of the problem with the origin of eukaryotes.
Yeah.
Another fun thing with that is like the segregation of parts within a cell is not unique to eukaryotes. Like, there are both archaeans and bacteria that segregate parts of their cell. So they have like membranes within membranes where they do certain biosynthetic pathways, right? Like there's this phylum called the planktomycetes, which are bacteria, and they have an organelle which is called the anemoxisome. It basically does these redox reactions within an enclosed a membrane enclosed space, which, like, if you take a high school or lower college level class, so like one of the major differences between prokaryotes and eukaryotes is prokaryotes don't have membrane bound spaces, and that's not true, actually.
That was my view until today.
It's not true. Yeah, there's like I think sulfolobus is an archaean that has like a membrane bound space, but yeah, there are different. I think that giant bacterium that was found recently, which was a Theomargarita member, also has like membrane bound spaces. So
these names are hilarious, man.
Yeah,
I can put some of them in our. I apologize. I can put some of them in our chat.
Look, biologists like a good joke as much as the next guy. So yeah, there are some silly names out there. I mean, look, there's a whole like there's a gene Sonic Hedgehog. I mean, there's a fossil turtle named after the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Yeah.
It's called Ninjames.
Yeah, actually, if you read the paper that first describes it, it says that. Was it under the etymology section? It says that they're named after those like totally radical tubular turtles or something like that. And it's just in the paper
along those lines. Yeah.
So, I think we lost video from
there you go.
Oh, there we go.
Trying to get back to. There we go. I was trying to get back to.
No worries.
Chat part, because I see Jackson's putting some stuff on there.
Okay, well,
I was putting in some of the.
I think we're at the point where we only have about 4 minutes before we said that we were going to start the Q&A, so I don't think we have a whole lot of time for lots more discussion about Eukaryogenesis. So, Jeremy, if you would like to take the next, minute or two, talk about your response, and then I think we can jump into Q&A because we already have some Qs. And I'm going to say right now, if you have questions for Jeremy, here's what you want to do. First, you want to tag me. You want to tag @DapperDinosaur and put a question in, unless your question is a super chat. If you super chat a question, you don't need to tag me, and it will go to the front of the question queue. That is how Q&A will work. I'll repeat that again. But so, Jeremy, do you have any last thoughts on Eukaryogenesis before we go into the Q&A? I want to give you the final word on this topic.
No, just man, I appreciate it. Again, I love debates. It's just the best way to learn, I think, clashing ideas. And so I appreciate all the stuff you guys have given me to look into. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, I'm having a great time, and I'm appreciating that you have some stuff that you want to look into. Because one of the reasons I run this channel is that I want to encourage people to learn things. It's not just all about pointing at someone I disagree with and say, haha, that guy's dumb. I want people to learn. And also, I don't think everyone I disagree with is dumb. Some of them I think are misinformed. Some of them I think are dishonest. And yeah, maybe some of them are dumb. I don't know. But I don't think you're dumb, and I don't think you're misinformed. I would probably say that you're probably underinformed is what I would probably say. But
you can always get more informed.
Yeah, I mean, look, everyone's underinformed in a lot of things. That's not a character flaw or something. Anyway, so I'm going to repeat now. We're jumping into the Q&A. So this is primarily a Q&A section for Jeremy is most of the idea, but here's the thing, right? If a question is good enough for anyone, I'll ask all of us, or if you really have a specific question for me or Jackson, you can ask. I ask that you try to keep the questions reasonably on topic, because we're here to talk about things like evolution, eukaryogenesis, young Earth, things like that, right? So try to keep them reasonably on topic. However, if you toss in a question like, what's your favorite pizza? It's not like I'm not going to come up with an answer. So it's a soft rule, right? And again, if you super chat a question, it will go to the top of the list. Otherwise, make sure you tag me specifically, because that is how I will recognize that there is a question to be asked. So we're going to go with our first question that we haven't asked already, which is a super chat question from Vishanti for $2 that says, does Jeremy have a degree? What field? And I'm going to actually say that I think we should all lay that out. And I'll actually go ahead and start. My only degree is a bachelor's degree in history. Jackson, what about you?
My bachelor's is in organismal biology, and here's hoping that by the end of this year, I'll have my master's in organismal biology.
All right. Jeremy?
Just a high school diploma and 1 year college.
All right. Did you have a declared major?
No.
Fair enough. I didn't have a declared major in my freshman year. So this is not really a question for the panel, but Nussig20 sent at 4:55 p.m. my time. It was like 6 minutes before Jackson got here. May I take Jackson's place until he comes in, if Jeremy agrees, of course. Sorry, Nussig, I knew that he was about to come in when you sent that, so I didn't ask Jeremy because I knew that Jackson would be in here so soon that you coming in would just kind of, like, you'd come in and then Jackson would be here immediately. So
Yeah. Do be happening.
So our next question that is super chatted is a $2 question from Vishanti, who asks, well, she put a J. I assume that because it's from 445, that means Jeremy, because of course J is the first initial of both of the other panel members here. What are the steps of the scientific method?
Formulate a hypothesis. Gosh, I'm sorry. I should have this memorized. So formulate a hypothesis. Test the hypothesis, and then come to your conclusion. There's got to be more. Aren't there like 7 steps? It's got to be repeatable.
I mean, kind of depends on who you ask.
Yeah, so unfortunately, there isn't one scientific method that just rules overall, but I usually go with, first you observe some kind of phenomenon, and then you develop a question about it, right? So why is this doing this thing? Then you come up with a hypothesis about it. Then, if necessary, you gather as much observation as you can. Then you think up either an experiment or a opportunity for further observation that will test your hypothesis. And the ideal form of the test is a test that where you can tell if your hypothesis is wrong. You want to say, no, this isn't right. That's the more important thing. It's easy to find confirming evidence. You want to find disconfirming evidence. Then you conduct the test or the subsequent observation, and you compare your predictions to the actual outcome. And from there, using various tools, usually mathematical tools about statistics, come up with a conclusion as to whether or not your hypothesis was disconfirmed, confirmed, neither. And then you work on things like, do you need to update your hypothesis? Do you need a new hypothesis? Do you need new experiments? Things like that. I think that's general enough that it can probably be generalized to most sciences. Jackson, do you agree?
Nope. I agree. And there's a lot of stuff. A lot of science nowadays is like taking huge databases and like just doing like statistical analyses on them, and that's totally valid as a way also to do science.
Okay. Let's see.
I agree.
So the next thing is a super chat from Vishanti. It's not technically a question, but I'm going to read it because, of course, I was paid to. So she says, DNA is not code. It is not programmed. Now, I didn't yell for the time that she was doing all caps, but you'll have to forgive me. Most of that was all caps. It's not really a question, but I do think it brings up an interesting point. We do see changes to DNA that are functional occurring in real time in organisms without being specifically programmed. I think most famously in the Lenski long-term Escherichia coli experiment, where he was able to, well, I'm not going to say he was able, the bacteria were able to create an entirely new metabolic pathway in which they could metabolize citrate despite the presence of oxygen, whereas their ancestors could not. And that was without any direct programming. Like, no one shoved that code into them. That was a part of mutations. In fact, because samples are taken every day and frozen, we can actually test to find out exactly when, I believe it was 2 different mutations that had to be coordinated, occurred.
There was a duplication. There was like an end-to-end a tandem duplication, and then there were some others that like sort of stabilized the relationship, if I remember correctly. But yeah, that was
overall the conclusion is because daily samples are taken and frozen for later use.
Right.
We can tell exactly when the important mutations happen and exactly what those mutations were and exactly which lines they happened in. And no one is sitting there in the Lenski experiment injecting new DNA into these bacteria. So, if you have a quick response to the fact that we can watch DNA change in living organisms to develop new features without being programmed, I would be interested. Although we're doing Q&A, so try not to make it a 5-minute answer, more of a 45-second. And I don't have any. I'm not going to respond to it. I don't think Jackson is either. Say whatever you'd like.
Depends.
Okay, fair.
Yeah. Yeah, my first comment would be that I was specifically saying mRNA is code. I know at the beginning I was saying DNA is information, but I was just saying that I was quoting that other apologist when I was just new. But I really try to specify mRNA because to me it's harder to say that mRNA is not code, even if it came about by random mutation. It's still, when it's translated, like I said, if Morse code is code, mRNA is code. And then I even agreed that random mutation does produce some functional code, and I think that experiment with E. coli shows us that. But again, I'm saying the systems had to be in place. If the system of mRNA, a ribosome, and the translation wasn't in place, then mutation wouldn't matter. It wouldn't be code because it wouldn't be translated.
I do just want to add. I'm not going to disagree with anything you said. I just do want to add one of the reasons I dislike calling mRNA code is that, and this is subjective, is that it does have to be processed. Like, it's kind of like if you wrote. Here you go. I'm going to use an analogy to try to describe.
Jackson, you said you didn't do that.
All right. Well, fine. I won't do it. All right. So you take a sequence
I'm curious.
You take a sequence of mRNA, and then you splice out all the introns, and you add a polyadenine tail, and then you cap it. You add a 5' cap. Yeah, so who'd that help? Anyway, imagine if you take, like, computer code, and then you say, we're going to remove a third of this. Like, it's a functional... I don't know. You write the whole program, and then you say, like, but when we turn on the program to have it run, the program will delete 30% of its code. That's the only way it can be functional. Like,
it is an odd way.
Nobody would design it that way.
Yeah.
Nobody would write it that way. Nobody. And the funny thing is, like, and this is another one I've heard people try to use for, like, oh, the spliceosome is so complex. Like, the only reason we need a spliceosome at all is, like, the mutations that generated introns, or, like, they were too neutral to be weeded out by natural selection. They just made the process more baroque. So that's why I dislike calling it code, because it seems to me kind of silly that someone would write, a whole program and then say, well, actually, in the process of it working, it has to cut out, like, I just use 30% as a random guess. It depends, right? It varies from protein to protein, but we have to cut out 30% of it. Like, why? Why would you write that code then? What is the point of that?
Well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give Jeremy a quick response, and then don't. Fine. Then we're going to move on to the next question. So, Jeremy, a quick response. We're talking like, try to keep it under a minute.
Yeah, sounds good. I would just say I still think it's code, even though it has to be highly processed. And yeah, maybe we'll understand more as time goes on of why it's that way. But I still think it's still code in the machinery to turn the code into more machine parts, even though in some instances it has to be very processed.
But like I said, it was just my opinion. It's just my subjective opinion on that.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I appreciate your...
Dave in Durham has, for 5 Kiwi bucks, asked, apologies if I missed this. Oh, sorry, apologies if I missed a bit of this. Has Jeremy looked into endogenous retroviruses?
Yes, I have. Yeah, I need to look into it more. But
that's fair. It's a fascinating area, and I know at least one person for whom it was the final nail in the coffin for special creation, at least of, like, eukaryotes, right? Because endogenous retroviruses is a thing that you can build your own, like, you can build a nested hierarchy just on the basis of those, and it comes out looking essentially identical to the nested hierarchy that you make from other parts of the genome or from morphology, and the way that those enter into the genome is largely stochastic. I mean, there are areas where there's more or less likelihood of insertion, but not to the point where it would insert in the same place in the genome. And so it's very hard to find a reason why, other than common descent, why ERVs would form this nested pattern. So I would highly encourage you to look into it. Very interesting thing. And don't be Kanthoven, who, when asked about it, all he could say was, well, I'm not prepared for that. And then he never prepared for it in the consequence. Not that I'm comparing you to Kanthoven. I would never do that.
I do have a question, though. So the central dogma does that mean the central dogma is not true? Because isn't the central dogma
Technically,
saying you
yes.
go from DNA, RNA to a protein, and this is kind of going backward?
Yeah,
Well, it's
kind of.
correct, but it's not the whole thing. It's like having a puzzle, right? I mean, these two pieces fit together irrespective of all the other pieces around them, right? Like, this is still correct. The central dogma from, in that sense, from DNA to mRNA to amino acid sequence, like that still happens. But also, there are these other processes involving reverse transcriptase where you can go from, you can go backwards, right? And that's fine. That doesn't invalidate what we already knew about.
Yeah, I just didn't know if it had to
central dogma.
change. If that changes the name, that they have to take dogma out, though.
Well, personally, I don't like the name anyway, but I don't get to name it. So
Same.
That was Francis Crick.
Yeah.
So
Crick's a weird sort of guy.
he was one of those. I think he was one of the dudes who suffers from like Nobel Prize winner syndrome.
Yeah,
Where they're
he
like,
does.
as soon as they get a Nobel Prize, they're like, I'm going to talk about everything. It's like, please don't.
Yeah.
Please stay in your lane.
Success is so hard on a person.
It really is. All right, so Savage Cobra Official asks for $5 US, what's y'all's favorite species of pelagic tunicate? Jeremy, you probably don't know this about me, but I think that pelagic tunicates are worthy of entire extinction, the entire group. We should get rid of all of them. Tunicates should do what they were made to do, which is to be sedentary, attached to some kind of substrate, mention feeding all the time, having their two-way hearts go back and forth. The idea that they're going around in the ocean column using jet propulsion and having fish hide inside of them, absolutely disgusting. So I don't have a favorite pelagic tunicate, but maybe you do.
Yeah, I don't know what they are.
Oh, okay.
You want to send me a message of one?
I'll send you one after we're done.
Okay, sounds good.
Jackson, what about you? Do you have a favorite species of pelagic tunicate?
I'm having a hard time even thinking of like genera of tunicates right now.
Of any tunicates?
Like, I'm just like trying to think of any genera, and I'm like, I'm drawing blanks.
I think the answer to that is that no one here has a favorite species of pelagic tunicate, which is appropriate because they're disgusting.
There you go.
Okay. Skeptics.
Botrytis? Isn't that one?
I don't remember off the top of my head. Skeptics
Botrytis,
and Scoundrels
yeah.
for 5.
Aha.
Oh, okay. There you go. That's your favorite, huh?
Hey, that's my favorite species of tunicate. There you go. I thought of
Tunicate
one.
overall, not just pelagic tunicate? Wait, is it pelagic?
I don't know. It's benthic.
Oh, okay. Well, then that's fine. That's a great answer for any tunicate. But I'm glad that you don't have a favorite species of pelagic tunicate because they're absolute.
I just don't know
abominations.
I don't know a whole lot about tunicates in general. So
Did you know that they have
Sorry.
an outer coating of cellulose?
No, that's weird.
Yeah, it's really weird. They have a little outer capsule
bizarre.
that's made of cellulose, and they're animals. Like, what the heck? Why are you making
Not a fan of
cellulose?
that.
Yeah, weird, right?
Oh, that needs to stop right now.
They also have two-way circulatory systems. They take a few minutes where their blood pumps one way, and then they reverse the direction of all their blood vessels and have their blood pump the other way.
Great.
Every few minutes, it just reverses direction.
That also needs to stop, like, immediately.
Actually, I think that's pretty
Post haste.
cool. Jackson just hates tunicates as a group. I only hate the pelagic ones. Okay, so Skeptics and Scoundrels for $5 says, let's say you were able to disprove abiogenesis and evolution here and now. How does that lend any credence to the claim that God created?
Well, to me, if we disprove abiogenesis, when I say disprove abiogenesis, we're saying it didn't happen from just a naturalistic processes, right? Not the RNA world hypothesis or protein first model. Well, then to me, that only leaves, and I don't think this is a false dichotomy, that just leaves some intelligent being or beings making it happen. You could say aliens, you could say extraterrestrials from another planet. To me, that pushes abiogenesis off to another planet, which, I guess may be possible if they have something. Their physical bodies use something that is able to emerge without intelligence involved. But to me, the most logical conclusion is that it's an intelligent agent that's not bound by 3 spatial dimensions, that is not trapped in a physical body. Then of course, then you've got the infinite regress, and so probably it's a being that had no beginning, but then it gets really weird. So yeah, so to me, it's just asking a question. Well, if we find out that abiogenesis could only, or the emergence of life could only emerge because of an intelligent being, then you're left with an intelligent being. But I mean, you can make that whatever you want to make it, extraterrestrial fairies or something.
Okay. So we are currently out of the super chatted questions, which means I'm going to start going into the questions that were tagged to me. Now, if you have a question right now as an audience member, do be aware that we've had a fair few and we might not get through all of them. So if it's really burningly important to you, I would suggest super chatting it. Although it's far from necessary. You don't have to. Anonymous Pi asks, question, biogeography after the flood. How did Australia get so many marsupials and so few placental mammals? And I want to put into the context that the only placental mammals that existed in Australia before humans got there and brought dogs were bats, which can fly, which explains how they got there. So I just, given that context about Australia, do you have a answer to the biogeographical conundrum that Australia presents to young Earth creationism?
Yeah, I've heard about it. I've heard of people saying some kind of raft of debris they got on, but who knows? That's kind of hard to believe for such distances. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
Do you want to know something cool about the whole biogeography of marsupials in Australia?
What's that?
So it was the only other. Do you know where the only other living marsupials are presently, aside from the Virginia possum? Do you know where the other ones are?
No.
South America. So the cool thing was we have fossils of marsupials in South America dating back to the Cretaceous, and we have living ones today in South America and also living ones in Australia. And so the question was, did they get to Australia by walking over Africa or Antarctica? Well, it turns out, based on the paleogeography, the tectonic plate movements, Africa moved away too fast. It moved away before they could have done that. So the only remaining option was, well, they must have traversed Antarctica back when it wasn't frigid, back when it was like a nice balmy forest. So this was specifically predicted by evolutionary biologists, and they found early marsupials in Antarctica, dating to the early Cenozoic, so 50 plus million years ago. So that was an explicit prediction of evolution of biogeography that was verified. That there are no marsupials in Africa, Europe, Asia, which we should theoretically expect if the Ark landed in the Middle East, right?
Yeah,
that would be a fair prediction, I would say, of that model, the hypothesis, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
So I would add that by and large, I feel like biogeography is almost entirely ignored by young Earth creation, and I wish it weren't, because it's a major aspect of how life on Earth exists now. Obviously, where is a thing, right? It's a big aspect of biology. And I don't hear any in-depth analysis of biogeography from young Earth creationists, other than just they dispersed from the mountains of Ararat, which okay, but that's not a model, right? That's just basics of where you start building a model from.
I also want to say that my secret project is also dealing with biogeography right now.
Nice.
And so the thing I've been reading about recently has been the Ice Age, which I know a lot of creationists are fine with the Ice Age, but it still doesn't fit because we have I think it's 100,000 years. The past 100,000 years was about 120,000 years to 12,000 years ago was the last Ice Age, right? The last glacial period. And so that the amount of sediment that we have from that period is not explicable on a rapid Ice Age, right? Because we can observe, and again, this was another prediction, by Darwin, that we should find plant fossils. So he observed that there are Arctic plants in the Arctic, obviously, but also on the high elevations of mountains, right? The same plant or very similar plants are on high mountain elevations in the northern hemisphere. If you look at North America, you've got these plants way up here on the mountains, like the white dryas, and then one's in the Arctic. And the question was, well, how'd they get there? Well, shortly before Darwin started working on origin, not Lyell, Agassiz came up with this idea that, like, hey, here's all this evidence for an ice age. So I'm going to say, so, this would explain all this geological evidence helps inform us as to how these organisms got here. So when the glaciers had moved further south and like surpassed these mountains, this allowed for greater range of these plants and also animals that now are restricted only to the Arctic and high mountains. And since then, paleontological work has been done, which shows, okay, we now know that these plants, which only have these ranges today, high mountains and Arctic, we can find them in the space between in the Ice Age sediments, which is exactly what was predicted, right? That's, again, another explicit prediction of like evolutionary biogeography. That just doesn't work on like a creationist timescale or a rapid ice age. There's not enough time for these plants to migrate.
So there are a couple of questions next, but I actually want to go slightly out of order because I think the second question can be answered relatively quickly, and we are coming up to where I think we need to.
Again.
No, it's okay. But I think we are coming up towards where we need to let Jeremy go.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask the second question first. Caleb Ray asks, Jeremy, do you think bacteria are living things?
Yes.
Yeah, that's why I figured it would be a quicker question, because I agree. I think we all agree bacteria are living things. The fearmonger official, not any of the imposter fearmongers out there, asks, Jeremy, can you give a definition of the biblical kind, in parentheses, hopefully more in-depth than X begets X, end parentheses. And then we got a very generous super chat, so we're going to at least get through that super chat before we get out of here.
Yeah, I don't think I can. And as we would have gone on further, as my, as what I see as evidence of design, and I do believe God created a variety of organisms. Of course, I've got a lot to study, but no, I don't think I can say where it ends, where it begins, where God created something and then it was, it evolved into a variety. So no, I apologize. I don't think I can.
Look, that's a level of candor that is not typical of most of the young Earth creationists that I encounter. So I appreciate that. Because here's the thing, I don't know is a great answer. It's way better than just making some nonsense up, which is what I get a lot of the time. So it's much appreciated. Now, I believe this will probably be our last question. So if you have further questions, we've already said that we were going to try and set up a second one, so perhaps write them down somewhere. But yeah, this is probably going to be our last question. Now, this is a super chat from Too Young to Feel This Old for $50. So first, I want to say thank you very much for your generosity. That means a lot to me. And the question is, how would Jeremy feel about studying up on the fact that selection pressures act upon self-catalyzing chemical reactions, the reactions involving biologically relevant chemicals that catalyze more of the same reactions over and over again? So this is about autocatalytic cycles and things like that in terms of origin of life research. So would you be interested in studying up on those kind of things?
I am. Gosh, I think the most recent long story short dealt with that.
Oh.
Uh-oh.
I know Jackson loves long story shorts.
I can't stand that pompous. I mean, yeah, he's great. I just want to look, Jeremy. If I could say one thing about him, not an insult. If I just want to say one thing,
okay.
Like I said, it's not an insult. He sincerely argued that the platypus, the duck-billed platypus, is a chimera of different organisms.
I remember that.
If Richard Dawkins, whom I like a lot, now as we said, like in our discussions, there's a lot of things we don't agree with that he says. But if Richard Dawkins proposed in like the Ancestor's Tale that the platypus is a chimera of different organisms, I would never pick up one of his books again. Like full stop. That would be it. I would say you are clearly not worth my time. And that is something he long story short, not Richard Dawkins. That is something, long story short, sincerely argued because we had a back and forth, and I have the video still on my channel.
I actually
shows he
watched that
defended that
video,
position.
your response to that, like 2 days ago, Jackson, and I couldn't stop laughing when he said that, and you just lost it. And I was like, yes, good.
Yeah, I honestly stopped responding to him because he skipped 14 minutes of one of our rebuttals to him. Like, the first 14 minutes of our rebuttal, he just jumped over it and ignored all of it.
Okay, but to be fair, we're getting pretty far away from the actual question, which, again, Too Young to Feel His Soul was very generous about.
Sorry, go ahead.
So, how would you feel about reading up on autocatalysis and how that has impacts on the possibility of abiogenesis and things like that?
Oh yeah, I'm open to anything. You know, I'm not afraid of evidence. I'm not afraid of knowledge. I'm afraid of ignorance. So, yeah, and gosh, somebody sent that to me probably 2 years ago, and I remember looking into it, and I can't remember what I thought, but I remember being not really convinced. Yeah. And my question to you would be: does that get you to? Could that get you to translation? You know, could that genuinely get you to mRNA, a ribosome, tRNA, and producing, functional polypeptide chains?
I mean, on its own, no, but I do think that autocatalysis is almost certainly an important part of abiogenesis because it allows for selection for stability and ability to reproduce the chemicals themselves in abiotic conditions. So it's sort of like, no, I don't think that observing that birds flap their wings is enough to get me to a functional ornithopter, but that doesn't make functional ornithopters impossible on their own, right? Like, it's a part of the puzzle.
Right, but it's like, man, I need a lot. Like, I don't just need, if you say, I believe throwing spaghetti against the wall could do a work of Shakespeare, and then you throw spaghetti on the wall and you're like, look, there's an S and an O, and I'm like, yeah, that's not close. So I'm just saying I need some pretty hard evidence to believe in something like abiogenesis.
All right.
And I'll look into it, but I'm just saying I want you to also be skeptical of that. Are you wanting abiogenesis to be true? Therefore, you take these little things and you say, "Oh, look, it's possible." Or are you being skeptical toward what is proposed as an avenue of abiogenesis?
I mean, honestly,
sorry.
Okay, so
honestly, should I go?
I'll go. Okay. If it were up to me, I would find it more interesting if there were some kind of supernatural explanation to life, because, I mean, look, I'm not a fan of materialism. I would rather there be more to the universe than just energy and matter. That sounds nice.
That's good to hear.
That doesn't make it true. If I have a bias, it's not a materialist. It's not pro-materialism.
That's good to hear.
My response to that is really, biochem is not my field. Like, I accept the consensus that, like, if all the biochemists and astrochemists and geochemists all are getting together and they're like working out the steps like piecemeal, and they seem to be confident in it, then okay, like that's I read a lot of technical literature. Let's just say I read a non-trivial amount of technical literature, and it's almost entirely like evolutionary biology related. I don't have time in my day to like background check like everything I understand about history or everything I understand about like cosmology. You got to pick your battles, right? And so like I'm not disputing anything they're saying. Also, I'm not saying that I know better than them and that they're wrong. I'm just saying, like, I have my area and I'm pretty confident that evolution's true because list of reasons. But like, if you were to, I don't know much about abiogenesis because I don't like chemistry. I've taken chemistry classes. I've read some books about this. I just don't like it. It's not my area. Sorry,
All right, well, here's what we're going to do. We're about to wrap up. So let's see. I'm going to ask Jackson what he has coming up on his channel. Then I'm going to go to Jeremy to say whether or not he has any like social media links or anything that he would like people to find. Also, if you do, please send them to me and I will add them to the description because currently I don't think I have any for you. For those of you who want to check out what Jackson's about to tell you about, he is linked not in the description, but in the title of the video. The title is Chatting with Young Earth Creationist Jeremy Spry, parentheses, featuring at Jackson Wheat. That at Jackson Wheat is a link that will take you to Jackson Wheat's channel. If you are currently subscribed to me or just watching this and not subscribed to Jackson, I feel like there's something fundamentally wrong with your YouTube experience, and you need to fix it.
Yeah, I'd have to say the same thing.
See? Everyone agrees. Go subscribe to Jackson Wheat. I mean, subscribe to me, too, if you're not already subscribed. But I feel like most of you probably are. So, Jackson, what do you have coming up?
My next video should be the lava lizard's tale, in which we finally leave the mammals.
It's been a while.
Rendezvous with the sauropsids.
Yeah, we've been with the mammals on your Ancestors Tale
like
series.
2 years, hasn't it? Something like that.
Something like that, yeah. Turns out there's a lot of mammals out there.
Yeah, it also helps that I put out like a video a month, like one of those. So
get
also
on,
doesn't
yeah,
make it
get
very
on my
fast.
level, Jackson. 3 a week. Come on.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. You have a lot of responsibilities that I don't. Don't worry about it.
So that's that one. I hope to not do any more like politics related videos in the near future because they just make me very down. So
yeah, no, I get that.
They upset me very deeply. So, okay.
All right. So, let's take a look at Jeremy. What do you got for us? What should we check out from you?
In about a month, I'll be talking to Dapper Dino and Jackson Wheat.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, I've got my my Facebook page, Atheism versus Logic, and my YouTube channel. I don't do a lot, but yeah, you're welcome to subscribe.
Wait a minute. Is that you on Twitter?
What?
Is it Atheism versus Logic?
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't been on that in a long time.
Oh, I just want to formally apologize for any things I've said in the past.
I don't apologize.
I remember interacting with that user, and I don't remember if everything I've said was kind. So I just want to preemptively apologize for anything I've said.
No, you're good.
Jackson's all friendly right here, but then you get him on Twitter, and he becomes a total jerk.
Okay, in fairness, we're looking at avatars rather than a person, so
it is easier to be mean on Twitter than it is in a situation like this.
Yeah, and you're being more direct, and I've been the same way, and a lot of times you don't know if somebody's trying to waste your time or
yeah,
that's true too.
True.
Yeah.
So no.
All right, well, let's take a look at what's coming up on this channel. So on the 28th, Jackson, what's going on the 28th?
Jackson with Jackson.
Absolutely. So if you want to see more Jackson, I think the next time he's going to be on YouTube will be once again on this channel for Tuesday for one of my regular drinking streams. So, if you want an excuse to drink on a Tuesday, come by on the 28th. We're going to be talking about Charles Jackson, the bad Jackson, if you will. So that'll be on the 28th. On the 2nd, which is the first Thursday, let me actually double check because I don't want to lie to you, but I also don't remember off the top of my head what's coming up. Yes. So we're going to be continuing with the final episode of the 3-part series about the ICR podcast, where they basically had 2 old men, one of whom was oddly proud about the fact that he used his military rank to sexually harass a female subordinate.
Ooh.
Yeah, that was weird. But they're going to tell us about some cool animals, which then I'll go into why yes, in fact, they are cool. And then they're going to say that they can't evolve, and then I will go into why yes, they can. That's not a thing. So that'll be on the 2nd? Yes, the 2nd. I don't know what's happening on the 4th. It'll probably be something. I'm hoping, I think, to get the final part of our Catholic Creationism series in with Vishanti. Because quite frankly, I want to get that guy into my rearview mirror. Because, I don't know. It's weird to be talking about a Catholic young Earth, or well, I don't know if he's young Earth, but a Catholic anti-evolutionist. I want to get that guy done and dusted, and I'm hoping that it'll happen on the 4th. So chances are it will. you know, in fact, I'll go out and say, even if Ashanti can't make it, there's a fair chance that I'll just go ahead and get through the rest of his video. I want to say Steve Areno has sent for $2 a series of emojis indicating that Dapper Dinosaur loves pelagic tunicates, which is, of course, a horrendous lie and slander, good sir. You will be hearing from my lawyers when I hire some. But with that, guys, I think we are all done with this. I want to say a special thank you to my guests, Jackson Wheat and Jeremy Spry. I had a lot of fun with this, and I hope that we can get a good date for another follow-on about the Age of the Earth, because I think that would be a fascinating discussion. It'll give Jeremy some time to read up on reasons he would accept a young Earth, things that he would put forth as evidence for that. And yeah, I hope to see all of you on Tuesday. So thanks again, and enjoy these end credits, where I will ask you to send me money because I want to keep this channel going, and it requires that. So, bye everybody! Thanks for watching, but before you go, I just want to say a special thank you to my channel members and my patrons, especially those pledging $20 or above. Bob Knob, Work in Progress, Bent Hovend, Tapioca Weasel, Danny5252, Ian Chen, Landon Knoll, Mabbity Babbity, San, Sphincter of Doom, The Venerable Bede, Elran Teller, Dr. Tapioca Weasel, and Pat L. Dennis. As you probably know, YouTube is a very volatile platform, and from month to month my income on the channel can swing wildly. But the people you see on screen are directly supporting so that I don't have to worry too much about that, and the channel can keep going as it is, and perhaps even improving. If you'd like to join this team, there are links below to join the channel or in the description to join the Patreon. The Patreon starts as low as $1 a month, and the channel memberships start as low as $1.99 a month. On Patreon, you can even get a discount for pledging annually. If you do decide to pledge, you'll get access to an exclusive Discord server just for channel supporters, as well as early access to all of my pre-recorded videos, often up to 2 months in advance. Higher tiers will unlock even better perks. Now, if an annual or monthly pledge isn't right for you, but you still want to support the channel, there is a merch store down in the description, as well as an Amazon wishlist, just for me. And if financial support isn't something you can or want to do, then if you still want to help out the channel, please just like and share these videos and make sure you comment on them. It really helps the channel out. Thanks again for watching.